The first thing I saw that Monday morning was my mother's name filling my phone screen. 17 missed calls sat underneath it, followed by 6 from my father and 4 from my sister. I was in San Juan 3 days into my marriage, watching early sunlight slide across the hotel curtains while Joshua slept beside me. I almost put the phone back down until I saw the newest voicemail from Mom. Her voice came through tight and furious. "If this goes any further, we could lose the house. I hope whatever trip you're on was worth that." At the time, I still thought she was exaggerating. I had no idea that one sentence would eventually take me back through years of family history and force me to understand what my parents had really been asking from me every time they said, "You're the strong one." Before I tell you how my honeymoon somehow became connected to my parents' house, I hope you're doing well wherever you're listening from. And stay with me because what happened after that voicemail changed the way I saw my entire family. If you enjoy stories about families, boundaries, and the moment someone finally stops accepting what everyone else calls normal, subscribe to the channel and stay with me. The strangest part was that none of this had started with a mortgage, a bank, or my sister's failing business. It had started 2 days earlier at my own wedding, when my mother took away a honeymoon she thought she controlled. Our reception was almost over when Mom found me near the edge of the ballroom. I was still in my wedding dress, my shoes were beginning to hurt, and Joshua had just gone to speak with one of his college friends before we left. Mom did not look angry. That was the first thing I remember clearly. She wore the calm, reasonable expression she always used when she had already made a decision for someone else and wanted them to understand that arguing would only make them look difficult. She touched my arm and said, "Taylor, I need you to be understanding about something involving Olivia." That sentence had followed me through most of my adult life. I did not roll my eyes or ask what Olivia had done this time. I simply waited. Mom told me Olivia had been under tremendous pressure with the boutique and needed a real break before things got worse. Then she told me she had changed the reservation at the resort in Asheville. The honeymoon reservation she had given Joshua and me as a wedding gift was now in Olivia's name. I looked at Mom for a few seconds because I wanted to make sure I had understood her correctly. "You transferred the trip you gave us to Olivia?" I asked. She nodded as though I had repeated a perfectly ordinary scheduling change. Dad had walked up behind her by then, and he gave me the expression he always wore when he wanted me to make a conflict disappear before Mom became upset. "You and Josh can travel later," he said. "Your sister really needs this right now." There were several things I could have said. I could have asked why Olivia's stress mattered more than the fact that I had gotten married a few hours earlier. I could have reminded them that Mom had spent months telling relatives how proud she was to give her oldest daughter a luxury honeymoon. I could have pointed out that a wedding gift usually stops belonging to the giver once it has been given. Instead, I looked across the room until I found Joshua. He had noticed the three of us talking and was already watching me. Our eyes met, and he understood immediately that something had happened. What my parents did not know was that the Asheville reservation had stopped mattering to Joshua and me weeks earlier. When Mom had first announced the gift, she talked about the resort constantly. She called it luxurious, exclusive, and romantic enough that several relatives assumed she had bought some elaborate honeymoon package. When Joshua and I finally received the reservation details, we discovered she had booked the least expensive room category the resort offered. It was a ground-floor room in a building near the parking area, with no mountain view, no meal package, no special amenities, and none of the extras Mom had allowed everyone to imagine were included. I had laughed when Joshua showed me the booking page because it was so perfectly my mother. She loved impressive labels. If the resort itself was expensive, she considered every room inside it luxurious by association. Joshua had asked whether I wanted to confront her. I told him no. I did not want the weeks before our wedding consumed by a fight over a room we had never asked her to buy in the first place. There was another reason we let it go. By then, I had already begun noticing questions from my parents that made me uncomfortable. My condo was under contract, and the sale was scheduled to close the Friday after our wedding. Mom had asked more than once whether the closing was still on schedule, and when the money would actually reach my account. Dad had asked exactly when Joshua and I were leaving after the wedding, how long we would be gone, and what day we planned to come back. Any one of those questions would have sounded normal. Together, repeated over several weeks, they felt different. I did not know what my parents wanted. I only knew I did not want my first trip with my husband controlled by a reservation my mother could change whenever she pleased. So, Joshua and I made our own plans. We booked flights to Puerto Rico and a hotel in San Juan using our own money and an account Mom had nothing to do with. We told my parents only that we would be away after the wedding. They assumed we meant Asheville, and neither Joshua nor I corrected them. That was why, when Mom stood in front of me at my reception and announced that Olivia now had the reservation, I did not fight for it. I looked back at Mom and said, "Then it's hers." Her face changed just slightly. She had prepared herself for anger, tears, or at least an argument. My agreement gave her nothing to manage. Dad visibly relaxed, probably believing I had decided to be reasonable again. Olivia appeared a few minutes later with the confirmation on her phone. She did not look me directly in the eye at first. Then one of our cousins asked if it was true that she was taking the resort trip, and Olivia smiled. It was a small smile, but I knew my sister well enough to recognize what attention did to her. She did not refuse the reservation. She did not tell Mom it was inappropriate to give her something intended as my wedding gift. She thanked our parents and said she really did need some time away. I did not know what Olivia was thinking, and looking back, I am glad I never pretended I did. I only knew what she chose. She knew that reservation had been presented as my honeymoon. She knew I had gotten married that afternoon. She accepted it anyway. Dad found me again about 20 minutes later. This time, Joshua was beside me. Dad asked whether we were leaving that night or the next morning. I told him we were leaving after the reception and had everything handled. He asked when we would be back in Charlotte. I said we had already given everyone the dates they needed. Dad smiled, but his eyes did not leave mine. "Just making sure," he said. That was when I remembered Mom asking about the condo closing earlier that week. She had wanted to know if the buyer's financing was solid. 2 days before the wedding, she had asked whether the proceeds would arrive the same day as closing. I had told her probably, assuming there were no last-minute delays. At the time, I thought she was being nosy. Standing beside Dad at my wedding, I began to wonder whether the questions about my money and the questions about my travel dates belonged to the same conversation. I still did not know enough to accuse anyone of anything, and I had no intention of ruining my wedding by trying to solve a mystery my parents refused to explain. Joshua squeezed my hand once. We said goodbye to the guests who were still there, thanked the people who had helped us that day, and left exactly when we had planned to leave. My parents thought I was going home without a honeymoon. Olivia thought she was leaving with mine. Once we were alone in the car, I stopped pretending it had not hurt. "I know we weren't going to use that reservation," I told Joshua, but she still took our wedding gift and handed it to Olivia in front of me. Joshua did not tell me I should have expected it. He did not tell me to call Mom back or cut anyone off. He simply said, "I know." That was one of the reasons I married him. He never confused supporting me with taking over my decisions. I looked out the window for a while before I said, "I'm still glad we're going." Joshua smiled. "Good," he said, "because our flight leaves in the morning." By then the decision felt bigger than a vacation. I could not explain why yet, but I was relieved that there was one thing my parents did not know enough about to rearrange. We flew out of Charlotte Sunday morning and landed in San Juan that afternoon. The moment we stepped outside the airport, warm air hit my face, and I felt the tension of the wedding weekend begin to loosen. For several hours, I barely looked at my phone. Joshua and I checked into our hotel, unpacked, walked until we found somewhere to eat, and talked about everything except my family. Olivia's trip went differently. I know that because she called me herself that evening. The moment I answered, she demanded to know what I had done to the reservation. Her voice echoed enough that I could tell she was somewhere public. I asked what she meant. She said the front desk had given her a key to a tiny ground floor room near the parking lot, and there had to be some mistake because Mom had told her the reservation was for a luxury honeymoon. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed in San Juan and looked at Joshua. He could hear enough of Olivia's voice through the phone to understand what was happening. I didn't change anything, I told her. That's the room Mom booked. Olivia stopped talking for a moment. Then she said I had known. I told her yes. Joshua and I had seen the room category weeks earlier. She asked why I had not warned her. That question almost made me laugh, but I did not. Because it wasn't your reservation when I saw it, I said. It was mine. She did not have an answer for that. A few seconds later, I heard Mom's voice in the background, and the call ended. Less than 5 minutes later, Mom called me. She did not ask whether Joshua and I were okay after having our wedding gift reassigned. She asked where I was. On our honeymoon, I said. There was a pause. What honeymoon? I looked at the open balcony doors, at the slice of blue evening sky beyond them, and understood something I had not fully realized at the reception. Mom had honestly believed that taking away the Asheville booking meant taking away our trip. She had assumed that because she paid for one reservation, she controlled whether Joshua and I traveled at all. I told her we had made other plans. She demanded to know where. I said we were away and safe. And that was all she needed to know. Her voice sharpened immediately. She asked when we would return. I reminded her we had already said we would be gone for several days. Then she told me Dad needed to speak to me about something important as soon as possible. I asked what it was. Mom said it was complicated and not something she wanted to discuss over the phone. I told her that if it could wait until we came home, we would discuss it then. She said she did not know whether it could wait. I asked whether someone was sick, injured, arrested, or in immediate danger. She said no. Then tell Dad to text me what he needs. I said. Mom accused me of being cold. I did not argue. That was another habit I had started breaking in the months before my wedding. I no longer spent half an hour defending myself from a label someone else had chosen because I would not give them the answer they wanted. The next morning, I woke to all those missed calls. Mom's voicemail about losing the house was the one that finally made me sit upright. I listened twice. Then I played Dad's message. His voice sounded tired. Taylor, call me before the bank workout meeting. We need to go over some numbers. Your mother thinks the condo money can fix this. I stared at my phone. My condo had not even closed yet. The proceeds were not scheduled to reach me until Friday, and Joshua and I had already made plans for that money. My parents knew all of that. Joshua was awake now. He looked at me and asked what had happened. I handed him the phone and let him listen to Dad's message. When it finished, neither of us spoke for a moment. Until then, I had thought my parents had stolen a honeymoon reservation because Olivia was their favorite, and Mom could not stand watching her struggle. That was insulting enough. But Dad's voicemail changed the shape of the entire weekend. They had not expected me to stay home because they cared whether I traveled. They had expected me to stay home because they already had plans for my money. I called Dad back before breakfast, not because Mom's voicemail had scared me into coming home, but because I wanted to know what she had compressed into the phrase, "we could lose the house." I had spent too many years watching panic erase useful information in my family. Someone would say everything was falling apart. Mom would start talking about what family owed one another. Dad would ask me to be reasonable, and by the time anyone finally explained the actual problem, half the decisions had already been made. I was not going to let that happen with a 6-figure sum of money I did not even have in my account yet. Joshua ordered coffee while I stepped onto the balcony with my phone, the morning already warm enough that I could feel humidity on my arms. Dad answered on the second ring. He sounded relieved. "Thank God," he said. "Your mother's been trying to reach you." I told him I knew, then asked the first question that mattered. "Is anyone hurt?" Dad paused. "No." I asked whether Mom was safe, whether Olivia was safe, whether anyone was being evicted that day, whether a sheriff was coming to the house, whether the bank had scheduled a foreclosure sale, and whether there was some legal deadline expiring before I could get home. By the time I finished, Dad sounded almost offended. "No, nothing like that," he said. "Then what exactly is happening?" He exhaled slowly. "Piedmont Community Bank wants a workout meeting on the business line this morning." That was the first useful sentence anyone had given me. I knew the bank's name. Juniper and Lace had used Piedmont Community Bank since Olivia opened the store, but I had never been involved in the account and had never asked to be. Dad explained that the line of credit was delinquent and that the bank wanted a repayment plan, a curtailment schedule, or some other credible path forward. He used enough vague language that I stopped him. "How much is outstanding?" I asked. Another pause. "Around 80. 80 what?" 82,000, roughly. I stared out at the hotel courtyard. I had expected a bad number. I had not expected that one. And why does Mom think my condo money has anything to do with a business loan I'm not on? Dad started talking about timing. The condo was closing Friday. They knew I would have proceeds. They were not asking me to take over the business, he said. They only needed help getting through a difficult stretch. I asked whether they had personally guaranteed the line. He admitted they had. Before I could ask the next question, I heard Mom in the background telling Dad to put me on speaker. A second later, her voice filled the call. "Taylor, this is not the time to interrogate your father." I told her I was not interrogating anyone. I was asking for the information they should have given me before deciding my money was part of their plan. Mom said nobody had decided anything. They were asking for help. I reminded her that Dad's voicemail had said she thought the condo money could fix the problem. "You haven't even told me what the problem is," I said. "You just told me I could lose the house if I stayed on my honeymoon." She snapped that I was twisting her words. "I said we could lose the house if this keeps going." "Today?" I asked. Mom went silent. "Is anyone taking the house today?" I continued. "Is there a foreclosure date? Is there a notice saying you have to leave? Is there anything happening this morning that requires me to physically be in Charlotte?" She said that was not the point. To me, it was exactly the point. An emergency that could eventually become catastrophic was still serious, but it was not the same thing as an emergency that required me to abandon my honeymoon before breakfast. Mom switched tactics. She said the house had been in our family for decades, that Dad had worked his whole life for it, and that Olivia's business had hit a rough patch no one could have predicted. She said if I understood how much pressure they were under, I would not be talking like an auditor. "You're asking me for money," I said. "That means I need numbers." She told me family should not need paperwork to help family. I almost laughed, but the situation was too serious. "You're not asking me for $500 until payday. You're talking about money from a condo sale. If you want me to consider anything, I need the total debt, the HELOC balance, the business line balance, vendor obligations, monthly operating losses, anything you've personally guaranteed, and whatever the accountant has recommended." Mom made a small sound like I had insulted her. Dad did not say anything. "And I want to know what the bank is actually asking for today," I added. "Not what you're afraid might happen 6 months from now." Mom told me I was treating them like strangers. I said strangers would get less consideration than I was giving them because strangers would never be allowed to plan around my money before asking me. That was when Dad finally spoke. He said he would send what he had. Mom immediately objected that I did not need every private document in the house. I asked how she expected me to lend a significant amount without seeing the documents. She had no answer, except that they had always trusted me. I said trust went both ways. I kept my voice even because I knew exactly what happened when I matched Mom's volume. The conversation stopped being about the problem and became about my tone. I was not giving her that exit. Dad said the bank meeting could happen without me. He sounded almost surprised to hear himself say it. I told him good. He and Mom were the guarantors, so they needed to hear the bank's options directly. I would read whatever he sent me. Mom said, "You could be here by tonight if you wanted to." I looked through the glass door at Joshua pouring coffee into 2 mugs. "I'm not flying home today," I said. "Taylor, if someone is injured, if there's a real safety emergency, call me. If this is financial, send me the financial information. I'm not making a decision because you're panicking." Mom told me she hoped I remembered that sentence if they lost the house. I told her I would remember exactly what had been said. Then I ended the call. Joshua handed me a mug when I came inside. He did not ask me whether we were leaving. He knew me well enough to wait until I had separated the facts from the emotional noise. I told him the business line was about $82,000 and that my parents had personally guaranteed it. I told him Mom was talking about the house as though a moving truck might arrive by lunch, but Dad had admitted there was no foreclosure date and no immediate threat to their housing. Joshua asked one question. "Do you know how the house is tied to the business?" I shook my head. I knew my parents had a mortgage and knew they had borrowed against the house at some point for renovations, but I had never asked for their balances. Their finances were their business until they decided mine should become theirs. I checked my phone. Dad had not sent anything yet. Olivia called while Joshua and I were eating breakfast. I almost ignored it because I had no interest in another argument about the Asheville room, but I answered because she had been pulled into whatever was happening, whether she understood that or not. She opened with, "Mom says you're refusing to come home." I said Mom was correct. Olivia asked how I could stay on vacation when our parents might lose their house. "Do you know why they might lose it?" I asked. She said because the bank was being unreasonable about her business loan. That answer told me more than she realized. "How much do you think Mom and Dad have put into Juniper and Lace?" I asked. Olivia became defensive immediately. She said they were investors, not victims. She reminded me that they owned part of the LLC and that all three of them had agreed the boutique needed time to grow. I asked for a number. "How much?" She said she did not know exactly. Maybe $40,000 beyond the initial investment, possibly $50,000. I looked at Joshua across the table. "Do you know they personally guaranteed an $82,000 line of credit?" I asked her. Olivia stopped talking. Then she said Mom had told her the line was manageable and temporary. I asked whether she had ever seen the statement herself. She said bookkeeping was Mom's area. I asked whether she knew there was any connection between the business and the house. "What connection?" she asked. That answer was enough. Whatever my parents had done, Olivia did not know the full shape of it. That did not make her innocent. She owned 51% of the company and had spent 3 years enjoying the title of founder and managing member. If the business was struggling, she had a responsibility to know its numbers. But there was a difference between refusing to look closely and being deliberately kept from the worst information. Olivia returned to the subject of the resort because that was easier. She said I had humiliated her by letting her drive 2 hours to a place where the room looked nothing like what Mom had described. "I didn't send you there," I said. "Mom did. She said I could have warned her." "When?" I asked. "At my wedding, after you accepted my honeymoon reservation?" She told me I was making everything about the fact that I had gotten married. I almost admired the sentence for its absurdity. "It was my wedding day, Olivia." She went quiet. I could hear voices around her, probably in the resort lobby or restaurant. Then she said, more softly, that she thought Mom had upgraded the reservation when she transferred it. I asked why she thought that. Because she said it was a luxury honeymoon. I told her the resort was luxurious. The room Mom had bought never was. Before we hung up, I asked Olivia one more thing. "Did Mom tell you they were expecting money from my condo?" There was a long pause. Olivia said Mom had mentioned that I would be in a better position to help after the wedding, but she thought that meant I might invest in the boutique someday. I had never discussed investing in Juniper and Lace with anyone. I told her that. Olivia said Mom probably did not mean it literally. I did not argue. I had learned that when someone was not ready to look at a fact, pushing harder often gave them something else to resist. I simply said, "Ask her." Dad's first packet arrived about an hour later. It was not the complete set I had requested. There were HELOC statements, a summary of the business line, and a spreadsheet showing several vendor balances. Even incomplete, the documents changed my understanding of the situation. The house had not simply been sitting there as an emotional symbol, while the boutique struggled separately. My parents had been pulling money out of their home for months. The current HELOC balance was more than $170,000. I scrolled through withdrawals and transfers, trying to understand the sequence. Some were clearly household expenses or things I could not identify. Several large amounts moved into accounts associated with Juniper and Lace. I was not a forensic accountant, and I had no intention of pretending to be one. I did operations work. My job had taught me how to build timelines, compare documents, and recognize when a process was drifting away from what people claimed it was doing. That was all I did. I opened a note on my phone and started listing dates and amounts. Joshua sat beside me but did not read over my shoulder unless I showed him something. He knew the difference between being supportive and taking ownership of a problem that belonged to my family. One transfer stopped me. It was not the largest amount on the page. It was just familiar. The date was in late 2024, and the transfer into Juniper and Lace happened within days of a deposit into my parents' account. $15,000. I stared at it until the memory came back clearly. Dad had called me that week sounding worried. He said a roofer had looked at the house and found a problem they should not ignore before winter weather made it worse. He had talked about possible water damage, drywall, insulation, all the secondary costs that could come from waiting. I had used the same contractor on a property issue before and knew the estimate was plausible. At the time, I had enough savings to help, and I had sent my parents $15,000. I had not thought about that money in months. Dad told me afterward they had decided to wait on the roof because they were comparing options. I remembered asking once whether they had rescheduled the work. He said they were handling it. I had accepted that because I had given them the money, not purchased a roof myself. They were adults. I did not believe helping my parents gave me the right to monitor every dollar they spent afterward. Looking at the HELOC statement now, though, I saw a transfer into Juniper and Lace close enough in both timing and amount that I could no longer treat the two things as unrelated. I showed Joshua the dates. He looked at them and said, "That's close." I nodded. Close isn't proof. That distinction mattered to me. I was angry enough without inventing facts. It was possible Dad had used my money for something else and funded the boutique transfer from another source. It was possible the roof work had been delayed for legitimate reasons. It was possible I was seeing a pattern because I now expected to see one. Before I accused my father of lying to me about a $15,000 repair, I needed to know whether the roof work had ever actually happened. What I did know was already serious. My parents had tied significant home equity to a business that Olivia thought had received far less family money than it actually had. They had an $82,000 bank line under pressure. They had vendor bills. They had known my condo was closing Friday. And instead of bringing all of that to me honestly, Mom had spent the week before my wedding asking when my money would clear, and Dad had kept asking when I planned to leave town. That afternoon, Mom sent me 3 messages. The first said the bank was being difficult. The second said Dad was overwhelmed. The third said, "I hope you're enjoying yourself while we deal with this." I read them and put my phone face down. An older version of me would have answered the third message first. I would have explained that I loved them, that I was worried, that I was not selfish, that I was still willing to help within reason. I would have tried to make Mom feel reassured before I had enough information to reassure myself. Instead, I replied only to the first message. Please have Dad send the remaining statements, including the accountant's recommendations and the full HELOC activity. I'll review them. Mom did not respond. Joshua and I spent the rest of the afternoon away from the hotel. I kept my phone with me, but I did not sit beside it waiting for permission to enjoy my own honeymoon. We walked, ate late, and let several calls go to voicemail. The fact that I could still enjoy parts of the day did not mean I did not care about my parents. That was something it took me a long time to understand. Concern was not the same thing as surrender. Loving someone did not require responding to their fear on the exact timetable their fear demanded. That evening, Dad sent another message. He said the bank had not demanded immediate repayment of the entire line, but they wanted a credible plan and were no longer willing to accept vague promises that sales would improve. He said they had some time, though he did not define how much. I asked whether any payment was due before I returned. He said no. I asked whether the house was currently in foreclosure. He said no. I saved those answers because I knew Mom's version would continue to sound much more catastrophic. Then I returned to the $15,000 transfer. I pulled up my own old bank records and found the payment I had sent my parents. Same week, Same amount. I searched my texts with Dad until I found the messages about the roof. He had sent me a photo of the contractor's estimate and written, "If we wait and water gets in, this becomes a much bigger job." I remembered believing him immediately because there had been no reason not to. Now there was. I did not yet know where my money had gone. I did not yet know whether the roof had ever been repaired, whether Dad had changed contractors, or whether the transfer into Juniper and Lace came from a completely different source. But for the first time since Mom's voicemail, the problem stopped feeling like one giant family emergency and became something I could actually investigate one fact at a time. I saved the contractor's name from the old estimate and set a reminder to call during business hours back in North Carolina. Then I closed the documents and looked out at the dark water beyond the hotel. The numbers were too close for me to ignore, but I still did not know what had happened to the roof. I waited until late morning in North Carolina before I called the roofing contractor whose estimate Dad had sent me back in 2024. The number was still active, and when the receptionist answered, I gave her my name and explained that I had referred my parents, Charles and Nancy Wilson, for a roof estimate about a year and a half earlier. I did not tell her why I was asking. I only said I was trying to confirm whether the work had ever been completed because I was reviewing some old household records with my father. She asked me to hold while she pulled up the account. A minute later, she came back and said the estimate had been issued, but no work order had ever been signed. There was no invoice, no deposit, and no record that their crew had performed any repair at my parents' address. I asked if maybe Dad had used one of their subcontractors or scheduled under another name. She checked again. Nothing. She did not speculate, and neither did I. I thanked her, ended the call, and sat with the phone in my hand for a few seconds. That confirmation did not prove exactly where my $15,000 had gone, but it removed the one innocent explanation I had been holding on to. Dad had told me the roof could not wait. I had sent money specifically because he said delaying could cause water damage. Then he had never authorized the work at all. I opened the old text thread again. The messages looked different now. Dad had sent the contractor's estimate, highlighted the line about damaged flashing and worn shingles, and told me, "If we wait and water gets in, this becomes a much bigger job." I had answered that I could help if he and Mom were short. He had called me afterward, sounding embarrassed enough that I remembered reassuring him there was nothing humiliating about needing help with a major home repair. I had transferred $15,000 the next morning. At the time, I had thought the discomfort in his voice came from having to ask his adult daughter for money. Now I wondered whether it had come from knowing the reason he gave me was not the real one. I called Dad directly. He answered after several rings. His voice was cautious. "Hey, honey, did you ever repair the roof?" There was no small talk after that. He said, "We did some maintenance." "That isn't what I asked." He sighed. "Taylor, why are we going back to that now?" "Because I called the contractor whose estimate you sent me." "You never hired them." "There was no work order and no payment." Dad went quiet. I had heard that silence before. It was the silence he used when Mom was upset and he was waiting to see whether someone else would fill the space for him. I did not. Finally, he said, "We decided the roof could wait. You told me the opposite before I sent you $15,000. I know. Where did the money go?" He did not answer immediately, which was answer enough emotionally, but I still wanted the fact. "Dad, I'm asking you once, where did my money go?" He lowered his voice. "Most of it went into Juniper and Lace." I closed my eyes. I had expected him to say it by then, but expectation did not make hearing it easier. "How much?" "About $13,000. And the rest?" "Household expenses, utilities, a few things we were behind on." I stood and walked away from the hotel desk because sitting still had suddenly become difficult. Joshua was across the room reading, and he looked up when he heard the change in my breathing. I held up one finger to tell him I was fine enough to continue. "Did Olivia know?" I asked. "No." "Did Mom?" "Yes." Of course she did. I pressed my lips together before asking the question that mattered more to me than the number. "Did you ever plan to tell me?" Dad said. "I planned to pay you back." "That's not what I asked. We thought the store would turn around." There was a vendor opportunity, and Olivia needed inventory for the holiday season. Nancy was convinced if we could just get her through that stretch, sales would catch up. Did you plan to tell me you lied about the roof? He exhaled slowly. I was going to explain once things settled down. I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny in it. When was that supposed to happen? He did not know. I asked him whether the roof had even been urgent when he called me. The estimate was real, he said quickly. I know the estimate was real. I asked whether you believed the roof had to be fixed immediately. He hesitated again. It needed work eventually. That was the first moment I felt something colder than anger. Dad had not fabricated a fake contractor or a fake estimate. That would have been easier to categorize. He had taken a real problem that existed somewhere in the future and made it sound immediate, because he knew I would respond to an urgent home repair faster than I would respond to another request for boutique money. He had used something true to sell me something false. Why didn't you ask me for money for the store? I asked. Dad said, because you had already said you weren't interested in investing. That answer was almost worse than if he had said he was ashamed. So you knew I would say no. I knew you had concerns. And instead of respecting that, you changed the reason. Taylor, we were trying to protect Olivia. I stopped walking. There it was again. Not help her. Not advise her. Protect her. From what? Dad did not answer. From knowing her business was losing money? She was under a lot of pressure. So was I. I just didn't know it because you were using my money to relieve hers. He said my name in the tired tone he used when he thought I was turning something practical into something emotional. I recognized it because that tone had shaped half my relationship with him. If Mom cried, the emotion was evidence. If Olivia panicked, the panic was a crisis. If I was angry, it was something to calm down. I told him I wanted the rest of the documents I had asked for. He said he was sending them. Not summaries, the actual statements, accountant emails, anything about the business line, the HELOC, and whatever options you were given before this week. Dad said, okay. Then Mom's voice came through faintly in the background. I could not make out the words, but Dad immediately became more guarded. Is she there? I asked. Yes. Put me on speaker. He did. Mom did not say hello. She said, I assume you called the roofer. I did. Then you know we didn't invent anything. The roof really does need work. I felt something in me settle. Her defense told me she had already rehearsed this conversation. You used my money for Olivia's store. We used money where the family needed it most. No, I gave you money for a specific repair because Dad told me it couldn't wait. And if Juniper and Lace had failed that winter, do you think your sister would have been fine? I looked at Joshua. He had moved closer but stayed out of the conversation. His expression told me he was hearing enough. Mom, I didn't agree to invest in Olivia's business. You benefited from this family your entire life. I had expected guilt. I had not expected her to say the quiet part so plainly. Are you saying that because you raised me, money I earn is available for whatever you decide the family needs? Don't be dramatic. I'm asking what you mean. I mean families help each other. I helped you. You changed what I was helping with without telling me. Mom's voice sharpened. Because you would have judged Olivia before giving her a chance. I already gave her a chance. I just didn't know I was doing it. That silenced her for a moment. Then she said, the money stayed in the family. I remember that sentence more clearly than almost anything else from that week. Not because it was loud, because it explained so much. The money stayed in the family. In Mom's mind, ownership had become flexible the moment she believed someone else needed what I had. My bank account, my condo proceeds, my time after the wedding, the honeymoon reservation she had bought and then reassigned. Everything could be moved around inside an invisible family ledger, as long as she was the one deciding where the need was greatest. I asked her, if I had told you I needed $15,000 for a medical bill and then used it to pay Joshua's business expenses, would you call that fine because the money stayed in the family? That's completely different. Why? Because we're your parents. There was no answer I could give that would make that logic fair. I did not try. Instead, I asked whether she and Dad still expected me to lend them money from my condo sale after admitting what they had done with the last money I gave them. Mom said, "This is bigger than one old misunderstanding." It wasn't a misunderstanding. Fine. One mistake. It wasn't a mistake either. Dad knew I wouldn't give money to the boutique, so he gave me a different reason. Dad spoke then. "That's fair." Mom said his name sharply. He repeated, more quietly, "She's right." It was not absolution. It was not courage. But it was the first time that week Dad had contradicted Mom while I was listening. Mom told him they did not need to turn on each other. I said, "No one is turning on anyone." I asked what happened. He answered. Mom replied that I was making Dad feel ashamed. That nearly broke something in me. Not because it hurt, because it was so familiar. Dad lying to me was unfortunate. Dad feeling ashamed because I named the lie was apparently the emergency. I ended the call before I said something I would regret. For the next hour, I did not look at my phone. Joshua and I walked along the waterfront, and I tried to focus on the physical world around me because numbers and conversations were beginning to blur together. Boats moved across the harbor. A family nearby argued cheerfully over where to eat. Somewhere behind us, music spilled out of an open doorway. I should have felt completely furious. Instead, what I felt most strongly was grief. There is a particular kind of pain that comes from realizing a memory you thought was proof of one thing was actually proof of something else. When I sent Dad that money, I had felt proud of myself. Not proud in a self-congratulatory way. Proud because I had become the kind of adult who could help her parents when something expensive went wrong. I remembered sitting in my condo after the transfer went through and thinking how strange it was that the people who had once paid for my braces, college application fees, and first used car could now call me when they needed help. I had thought the moment meant the relationship between us had changed because I was an adult. Now I understood that Dad had counted on exactly that feeling. He knew I would want to be dependable. I had spent years treating dependability as one of my best qualities. Mom had encouraged it from the time I was young. "I never have to worry about you." She used to say that with pride. When I got my first apartment, she said it. When I handled college applications mostly on my own, she said it. When I took a demanding job and moved through promotions without calling home every time something went wrong, she said it. I had always heard love in the sentence, and there had been love in it. That was the difficult part. Mom had not been a monster when I was growing up. She had stayed up with me when I had the flu. She had driven 3 hours through heavy rain for a university ceremony because I told her it mattered to me. She once spent an entire weekend helping me move into an apartment because the friend who promised to help canceled at the last minute. I could hold those memories and still admit something else had happened over time. "I never have to worry about you" had slowly become permission not to worry about me. If I was upset, I would recover. If Olivia was upset, someone had to intervene. If I lost something, I would replace it. If Olivia lost something, maybe the family could find her another. At the time, I still did not understand how deliberate that pattern had become. But the roof money was the first fact I could no longer explain away as Mom simply being overprotective. Joshua listened while I told him that over dinner. He did not interrupt to tell me my parents were terrible or that I should cut them off. He knew I did not need someone else deciding how I should feel about them. "What hurts the most?" he asked. I thought about it before answering. Not the money. $15,000 mattered. I was not wealthy enough to pretend otherwise. But I had recovered financially. The money was not why I could not stop thinking about the call. "He sounded scared," I said. When Dad asked me for it, he sounded genuinely worried about the house. I remember trying to make him feel better because I thought he was embarrassed to need help. Joshua nodded. He let me comfort him while he was lying to me. That was the part I could not make smaller. A text from Dad arrived while we were still at dinner. "I'm sorry. You deserved the truth then." I read it twice. Then another message came. "I'm sending more records tonight." I did not respond immediately. When we returned to the hotel, there was an email waiting from him with several attachments. The first was a fuller HELOC statement. The second was a spreadsheet from the business accountant. The third was an email chain. I started with the spreadsheet because it was straightforward. Juniper and Lace had been losing money longer than Olivia seemed to understand. There were periods when revenue improved, especially around holidays, but inventory purchasing had repeatedly eaten through those gains. Vendor balances accumulated. The business line increased. My parents kept moving money in. The pattern looked less like one bad season, and more like a business that had been kept alive by outside cash. Then, I opened the email chain. The message at the top was dated December of the previous year. The accountant had written to Mom, copied Dad, and used careful professional language. She did not say the business was doomed. She said current cash flow did not support continued purchasing at the existing level and recommended an immediate meeting with all LLC members, including Olivia, to discuss options. One phrase stood out: orderly wind down. I stopped scrolling. That was not language people used when they believed a business only needed one more good month. I continued reading. The accountant recommended stopping new inventory commitments, selling existing stock, negotiating vendor obligations, and reviewing the personally guaranteed line of credit before further household assets were exposed. Dad had replied the next morning. I agree, we need to show Olivia the full numbers. Then Mom replied. Her message was longer. She said Olivia was already overwhelmed. She said the wedding season was stressful for everyone. She said telling Olivia the business might need to close before my wedding would crush her confidence and create unnecessary drama for the family. Then she wrote, let's get through March 1st. After Taylor's wedding, we'll have more options. I read that line again. More options. By then, I knew exactly what had been scheduled for the week after my wedding. My condo closing. I scrolled farther. Dad had not agreed. He had replied that waiting could make the numbers worse. Mom answered that Olivia could not take another failure right now. There were no more messages in that chain. I sat back and looked at Joshua. What? He asked. I turned the screen toward him. He read silently. I watched his expression change at the same sentence that had changed mine. After Taylor's wedding, we'll have more options. My parents had known months before my wedding that Juniper and Lace might need to close. They had known the business was bleeding money. They had known their house was being exposed. And Mom had deliberately chosen not to tell Olivia because she believed another solution would appear after my wedding. Me. I still did not know how much money she expected from me. I did not yet know whether selling the house had ever been discussed. And I did not know how far Dad had gone along with Mom's plan before he started forwarding me documents. But, for the first time, I could see the shape of the secret. The boutique was not failing because of something that happened during my honeymoon. It had been failing for months, maybe longer. The crisis my parents wanted me to fix had been waiting for me before I ever walked down the aisle. A final message from Dad appeared while I was still reading. There's more. Your mother doesn't know I'm sending this. Attached beneath it was another email. The subject line read, Recommended wind-down options Juniper and Lace. The email Dad sent me was more detailed than the one I had already read. It came from the same accountant, but this version included the attachments and follow-up recommendations that had apparently been circulating between my parents since December. I opened it expecting more of the same language about cash flow and inventory. Instead, I found a document that made one thing painfully clear. Nobody in my family had been surprised by the situation that Monday morning. They had known where Juniper and Lace was headed long before my wedding. They had simply disagreed about who should be told and who should pay to delay the inevitable. The accountant had broken the problem into steps. Stop placing new inventory orders. Sell down existing stock. Negotiate with vendors before balances aged further. Meet with Piedmont Community Bank about the business line. Most importantly, bring all 3 members of the LLC into the same room and decide whether continuing the business made financial sense. Olivia owned 51% of Juniper and Lace and was the managing member. Mom and Dad each held 24.5%. That meant my parents could not simply close the store behind her back even if they wanted to. Olivia had to be part of the decision. The accountant said that explicitly. That mattered because it changed the way I understood what Mom had done. She had not exercised some secret legal power to keep the boutique open. She had done something simpler and, in some ways, more damaging. She had kept Olivia from seeing how close the business was to needing an orderly shutdown. As long as Olivia did not see the full books, she could keep believing the store was going through a temporary rough patch. As long as Mom controlled most of the bookkeeping and filtered what Olivia heard, she could keep buying time. The accountant's tone was professional, but the numbers were blunt. The business line at Piedmont Community Bank was sitting around $82,000. Vendor obligations were approaching $46,000. There was still inventory that could be sold, but nowhere near enough to cover everything at full value. The estimated liquidation recovery was roughly $30,000 if handled carefully. Mom and Dad had personally guaranteed the bank line, which explained why the lender had leverage over them even though the boutique itself belonged mostly to Olivia. I read the numbers twice and then wrote them down on a hotel notepad. 82,000, 46,000, 30,000 recoverable inventory, 172,000 on the HELOC, 15,000 from me, most of which had been redirected into the store. None of those figures alone explained the entire crisis, but together they made one fact unavoidable. My parents had been using household resources to keep Juniper and Lace alive long after the business had stopped supporting itself. Joshua sat across from me with his laptop closed. "How bad is it?" he asked. "Bad enough that an accountant told them to start winding down in December. And they didn't tell Olivia?" "No." "Did they tell you?" I looked at him. He nodded once. "Right." There was no sarcasm in it. Just recognition. I kept reading. Dad's reply to the accountant was short. He said he agreed Olivia needed to see the full numbers, and that they should discuss an orderly exit before further family assets are exposed. That sentence surprised me. It did not erase what Dad had done with my roof money, but it told me he had understood the problem months before the wedding. Then Mom replied. She wrote that Olivia was already barely holding things together, that closing the boutique would destroy her confidence, and that March was a terrible time to force such a conversation because of my wedding and everything else happening in the family. The phrase everything else made me stop. At the time, my wedding had been the largest thing happening in the family. Apparently, Mom had also been waiting for something else. I found it in the next line. "Let's get through March first. After Taylor's wedding, we'll have more options." I had already seen that sentence once, but reading it inside the full thread made it worse. It was not an emotional remark made during a fight. It was part of a financial discussion. The accountant had recommended cutting losses. Dad had agreed they needed to show Olivia the truth. Mom had asked everyone to wait until after my wedding because she believed more options would become available then. My condo sale was scheduled to close 6 days after my wedding. I did not need to guess what option she had in mind anymore. I called Dad. He answered quietly, like he had been expecting me. "Did Mom know my condo was closing on March 20th when she wrote this?" "Yes." "Did you?" "Yes." "Did either of you tell the accountant that I had agreed to invest money in Juniper and Lace?" "No." "Did I agree to lend you anything?" "No." "Then what did more options mean?" He hesitated. "Dad, she thought you'd help once the sale closed. How much?" He did not answer immediately. I could hear the television somewhere in the background. Then I heard a door close, and Dad's voice got lower. "We hadn't settled on a number." "That is not what I asked," he sighed. Nancy was thinking around 100. For a second, I thought I had misheard him. 100 what? 100,000. I stared at the wall in front of me. My projected net proceeds from the condo were about $126,000. Mom had been thinking about taking nearly 80% of it, not borrowing a few $1,000s, not asking me to cover one late payment. $100,000. "And when exactly were you planning to ask me for that?" Dad said. "After you got back from Asheville." That was when another piece clicked into place. Except I had never been going to Asheville. Mom had not known that. She believed the resort reservation was my honeymoon. When she transferred it to Olivia, she thought she had removed the trip itself. I leaned forward. "Dad, when Mom gave the reservation to Olivia, did she think Josh and I would stay in Charlotte?" He did not answer fast enough. "Dad, yes." The anger I had been trying to keep organized sharpened into something much clearer. Was that the point? It was part of it. What was the rest? He said Mom believed Olivia needed to get away before they told her how bad the boutique was. She thought sending Olivia to the resort would give them a few quiet days to get things in order. Meanwhile, I would still be in Charlotte. My condo would close that Friday, and they could sit down with me before the banking situation became harder to manage. So she wanted Olivia out of town, and me in town. Dad said nothing. She took my honeymoon reservation from me because she thought that would do both. She thought it would make things easier. For who? He did not answer. I laughed once, but there was no humor in it. You were planning a family intervention around money I hadn't even received yet. That's not how I would describe it. Then describe it. Dad sounded exhausted. We were trying to keep the house, help Olivia, and keep the bank from squeezing us all at once. All of us? He went quiet again. I caught the wording immediately. Dad, this bank has nothing to do with me. I know. Then don't say us. He said my name softly. No. I need you to understand something. You and Mom signed those guarantees. You and Mom used the HELOC. You and Mom decided not to tell Olivia the accountant wanted a wind-down meeting. You and Mom moved my roof money into her business. I wasn't part of any of that. I know. Then stop talking like I'm one of the people who created the problem. That was the first time during the honeymoon I heard him say, "You're right." It did not make me feel better. If anything, it made me more frustrated because it meant he had enough clarity to understand the truth and had still gone along with the plan. I asked him one more question. What happens if you don't get $100,000 from me? He said they would have to make harder choices. What choices? There was another pause. The house might have to be sold. I had expected the answer. It still landed heavily. Why? Because there's equity in it. I waited. He continued. We looked at options in January. What options? Dad did not answer for several seconds. Then he said, I spoke to a realtor. That was new. What realtor? A woman named Karen Holt. She works with a firm up here. I asked her what the house could sell for and what we'd clear after the mortgage and the HELOC. I closed my eyes. So you already know what selling the house would look like. Roughly. Why did Mom tell me you could lose the house like there was no other option? Dad did not defend her. He just said, because she doesn't want to sell. I felt the conversation shift again. Until that moment, I had understood Mom's fear in the most generous possible way. She thought the family home was in danger, so she was desperate. Desperation did not excuse lying or manipulating me, but I understood why a person might panic if they believed they were about to lose the place they had spent decades building. But if my parents had already spoken to a realtor, already calculated the equity, and already knew what downsizing would look like, then this was not simply a question of losing the house. It was a question of refusing to let go of it. Send me what the realtor gave you, I said. Dad hesitated. Please. I'll find it. Today. All right. Then Mom's voice came from somewhere nearby. Charles, who are you talking to? Dad said he had to go. I ended the call before Mom took the phone. The realtor packet arrived less than an hour later. It was not dramatic. No secret contract. No signed listing agreement. Just a comparative market analysis, a projected range, a basic seller net sheet, and a few emails between Dad and the realtor. The house was estimated around $640,000, depending on market conditions and final inspection. The first mortgage balance was approximately $155,000. The HELOC was roughly $172,000. After estimated commissions, closing costs, and debt payoff, the projected net proceeds were somewhere in the mid-$200,000 range. It was not enough to preserve their current lifestyle without changes. It was more than enough to keep them from being homeless. The realtor had included information on smaller condos in the area that would fit within their retirement budget if they used part of the sale proceeds for purchase or down payment. Dad had even asked about neighborhoods near their doctors and grocery stores. This was not a vague possibility. He had thought it through. I showed Joshua the net sheet. So they have a way out, he said. They have a painful way out. That's different. I nodded. It was exactly different. My parents were not staring at a cliff with nowhere to go. They were looking at a door they did not want to walk through. The distinction mattered because Mom had been asking me to destroy most of my own housing plan so she could avoid changing hers. I called her that afternoon. She answered immediately. I understand Dad has been sending you private documents, she said. There was no greeting. I said, yes. He had no right to do that without talking to me. They're documents about a financial crisis you're asking me to fund. That does not mean every detail is your business. If you want $100,000 from me, every detail affecting whether you can repay it is my business. She did not deny the number. That confirmed Dad had not invented it. You make it sound like we're asking you to throw money into a hole. Aren't you? No. Then what changes after I give you the money? She started talking about holiday sales, spring inventory, a revised marketing plan Olivia had been considering, and the possibility that the bank would become more flexible if the line balance came down. I stopped her. Has the accountant changed her recommendation? Silence. Has Olivia seen the wind-down email? Not yet. Has Olivia seen the full business line balance? She knows the store has debt. That isn't what I asked. Mom said, Taylor, you have no idea what your sister has been through. I could feel the conversation trying to move away from numbers again. I did not let it. Did the accountant recommend winding down? Yes, but accountants are conservative. Did Dad agree Olivia needed to see the numbers? He was panicking. Did you tell him not to? I told him timing matters. Did you know the realtor estimated you could sell the house, pay the mortgage and HELOC, move somewhere smaller, and still have money left? The line went silent. Then Mom said, Your father had no business dragging you into that. You dragged me into it when you told me my condo money could save the house. I never said save. Dad said you were expecting about $100,000. That was a possibility. To you, not to me. Mom's voice hardened. You would rather watch us sell the house you grew up in than help. There it was. The emotional blade. For a second, it worked. I pictured the front steps where Dad had taught Olivia and me to ride bikes. The dining room where we had eaten Thanksgiving dinner almost every year. The narrow pantry door with pencil marks recording our height from childhood into our teens. My old bedroom upstairs. Mom had spent months turning those rooms into a moral argument before I even knew there was a financial problem. I said, I don't want you to sell the house. Then help us keep it. That doesn't answer whether keeping it makes sense. Of course it makes sense. This house is our family. No, it's a house. She inhaled sharply. I continued before guilt could take over. An important house. A house I love. A house full of memories. But selling it is not the same thing as destroying the family. You say that because you have another home. I had another home, I just sold it. She went quiet. That was the moment I realized Mom was not only afraid of financial loss. She was afraid of what the sale would mean socially. The realtor emails Dad had forwarded included one message where he asked whether a quiet, off-market sale might be possible. The realtor had answered that it could be explored but might reduce competitive exposure and potentially affect price. Dad had then written that Nancy was uncomfortable with neighbors, knowing they were downsizing. I had not understood why until now. Mom, is this about losing the house or about people knowing why you sold it? That is a disgusting thing to say. Is it wrong? You think I care what the neighbors think while your father and I are trying to protect this family? I think you've spent months protecting the appearance that nothing is wrong. She told me I had become cruel since getting married. I almost smiled at that. The wedding had happened 2 days earlier. Apparently marriage had transformed me remarkably fast. No, I said. I just stopped answering questions you didn't actually ask. What does that mean? You didn't ask if I wanted to invest in Olivia's business. You used roof money. You didn't ask if I wanted to lend against my condo proceeds. You planned around them. You didn't ask Olivia if she wanted to wind down her store. You kept her from seeing the full numbers. You keep calling this family help, but the part where anyone agrees seems to be missing. Mom's breathing changed. Then she said, Olivia cannot take another failure. The sentence came out quieter than everything else. For the first time, I heard the fear underneath her anger. I knew what she meant. Years earlier, when Olivia was around 15, she had gone through a public failure that Mom never really recovered from watching. Olivia had entered a competitive school program she desperately wanted, made it farther than anyone expected, and then been cut before the final stage. She had taken it badly, Not catastrophically, but badly enough that Mom began treating disappointment like something dangerous. At first, that looked like compassion. Over time, it became prevention. Every setback needed cushioning. Every rejection needed someone else to explain why it was unfair. Every financial mistake needed more time. Every consequence became something Mom believed Olivia should be protected from. I understood where it came from. That did not make it healthy. Mom, I said, closing a business that doesn't work is not the same thing as destroying Olivia. You don't know that. Neither do you, because you haven't let her face it. She's my daughter. So am I. The words came out before I planned them. Mom stopped. I had not intended to make the conversation about childhood, but the sentence had been waiting somewhere inside me. She finally said, "You've always been fine." I looked down at the table. There it was again. The compliment that had followed me my whole life. "You've always been fine." "I've been responsible," I said. "That's not the same thing as having unlimited capacity. You're stronger than she is." "Maybe. That doesn't make my money hers." "I did not say it was hers. You planned to use it to keep her business open. For the family." We're back to that again. Mom exhaled hard. "I am not selling this house because your sister's business had one bad year." "One bad year?" She did not answer. I knew from the accountant's documents that the losses stretched much longer. "Have you even shown Olivia the December email?" "No." "Why?" "Because I am not going to tell her she failed 3 days after your wedding." "Then tell her next week." Silence. "Mom?" "She needs time." "How much?" No answer. That was when I understood that time itself had become the product Mom was trying to buy with my money. Not a solution. Not a turnaround. Time. Time before Olivia had to know. Time before the house had to be listed. Time before neighbors saw a for sale sign. Time before Mom had to admit that the story she had been telling about our family no longer matched the books. $100,000 buys you time, I said. What happens when the time runs out? The boutique could recover. Could? Yes. And if it doesn't? We'll deal with that when we get there. We are there. Mom did not speak. I said, I'm not giving you $100,000 to postpone the same decision the accountant told you to make in December. You haven't even come home. I don't need to be standing in your kitchen to know a business line is $82,000. You think everything is numbers. No, I think numbers matter when the solution you want is my money. She told me she needed to go. Before she hung up, I asked one final question. Why didn't you tell Olivia? Mom said, because she trusts us. Then the call ended. I sat there thinking about that sentence. She trusts us. Not she would disagree. Not she would refuse to close. Not she would insist on taking another loan. She trusts us. Mom had turned Olivia's trust into permission to keep her uninformed, just as Dad had turned my trust into permission to change the purpose of my money. 2 daughters, 2 different methods, same family habit. Joshua and I spent the rest of the day away from spreadsheets. I needed distance from the numbers because I could feel myself beginning to treat them as a puzzle I could solve if I just found the right sequence. But the numbers were not the actual problem. They were evidence of choices already made. That evening, Dad called again. He sounded calmer. I asked whether Mom knew he was speaking to me. Yes. That surprised me. She's angry. That does not surprise me. Dad gave a tired laugh that died quickly. Then he said, I want to correct something. I waited. The house isn't in immediate danger. I know. The bank wants a credible plan. We have time, not forever, but time. How much? A few weeks before they want the next formal proposal. Maybe longer depending on what we pay down. Good. He sounded confused. Good? Yes, because that means no one needs me on a plane tonight. Dad did not argue. I asked him whether he still believed giving them part of my condo proceeds was the best option. He took a long time to answer. No. That surprised me more than anything else he had said all day. What do you think is the best option? I think we need to tell Olivia. And then? Stop buying inventory. Wind down the store if she'll agree. Sell the house if we have to. Clean up the line and the vendor balances. Get out before we make it worse. It was almost exactly what the accountant had recommended. How long have you thought that? Since January. I looked at the realtor packet again. Then why didn't you do it? He gave me the answer I already knew. Your mother. I felt my patience tighten. No, don't do that. What? Don't make her the whole answer. You signed the HELOC. You moved the money. You lied to me about the roof. Mom did not do those things alone. Dad was quiet. You're right, he said. I let the silence sit. Then I asked, what did Mom expect to happen after she gave Olivia the Asheville reservation? Desihil. She thought Olivia would go up there for a few days. She thought you and Josh would stay home because you didn't have the reservation anymore. She wanted us to sit down Sunday night, then deal with the bank Monday. She thought once you saw the numbers, you'd understand. Understand what? That we needed help. And once my condo closed, she thought you'd lend us the money. I looked toward the balcony, where the Puerto Rican evening had gone dark beyond the glass. How much? You already know. I want to hear you say it. Dad's voice dropped. $100,000. I closed my eyes. There was something clarifying about hearing the number twice. Mom had not been hoping I might volunteer to help. She had built a weekend around the assumption that I would. Olivia would be safely away. I would be stranded in Charlotte after losing the honeymoon reservation Mom believed was my only trip. The bank pressure would be waiting. The family home would become the emotional weapon. Then 6 days later, my condo would close. My mother had not known the money would be hers. She had simply believed I would eventually understand that it should be. I asked Dad, did Mom ever say what happens if I say no? He was silent for so long that I thought the call had dropped. Finally, he said, I don't think she seriously considered that. That answer stayed with me. Not because it surprised me, because it explained the entire plan. Nancy had not needed a backup strategy. Her backup strategy had always been me. Olivia called me the next morning before I had finished my coffee. She did not say hello. She said, Mom says you're trying to force them to sell the house. I closed my eyes for a second and leaned back in the chair. Joshua was out on the balcony, answering a work email before we headed out, and I was grateful he was not standing close enough to hear the first 30 seconds of what I suspected would become another argument. That's not what I'm doing, I said. She says you told them you won't help unless they sell. I told them I won't give them $100,000 to keep doing the same thing they've been doing. That's the same thing. No, it isn't. Olivia exhaled sharply. You've always thought the boutique was a waste of money. That stopped me. Who told you I said that? She was quiet for half a beat. Mom. When? I don't know. More than once. What exactly did she tell you? Olivia hesitated, and I could hear her moving around somewhere, probably still at the resort. She said you thought Juniper and Lace was irresponsible. That you thought I should have gotten a normal job. That you thought Mom and Dad were throwing good money after bad. I looked out toward the balcony. Some of those ideas were not completely foreign to me. I had absolutely questioned the business model in my own head. I had worried when Olivia expanded inventory too quickly. I had wondered whether our parents were helping too much. But I had never told Mom that Olivia should get a normal job. And I'd never told anyone the boutique itself was worthless. I never said that, I said. Olivia laughed once. Of course you'd say that now. I'm saying it because it's true. So Mom just made it up? I don't know yet what she told you and why. I know I didn't say those things. Olivia went quiet. Then she said, You've never supported the store. That accusation annoyed me more than I expected, because it was broad enough to sound true if nobody asked what supported meant. I had attended the opening. I had bought gifts there. I had recommended the store to coworkers. I had even helped Olivia compare shipping software during her first year, because she asked me to look at the operational differences. What I had not done was write checks every time cash flow tightened. I supported you, I said. I did not agree to finance you. That sounds exactly like you. What does that mean? Cold. I almost responded defensively, then stopped. I knew where that road went. If I spent 20 minutes proving I was not cold, the actual conversation disappeared. Olivia, how much do you think Mom and Dad have put into Juniper and Lace? There was a pause. We already talked about that. No. You guessed. I didn't guess. You said 40 or 50,000 beyond their initial investment. That's about right. It isn't. She did not answer. I continued. Do you know the balance on the business line? She said, Mom said it's being handled. That isn't a number. Why are you doing this? Because you called me saying I'm forcing our parents to sell their house because I hate your business. Before we keep going, I need to know whether you actually understand what's happening. I understand enough. Do you know the business line is around $82,000? Silence. Do you know Mom and Dad personally guaranteed it? Still nothing. Do you know the HELOC balance? What does the HELOC have to do with my store? That answer told me everything I needed to know. I lowered my voice. You really don't know? What? They've been using the house to help fund the business. No. The word came too quickly. I've seen the statements. No, Mom would have told me. I did not answer that. Olivia said, Dad would have told me. I still did not answer. Then her voice changed. The anger was still there, but something uncertain had entered it. How much? I don't think I should be the one giving you every number over the phone. You just started. I told you enough to understand why this isn't about me hating your store. How much, Taylor? I thought about it. There were some truths people had a right to hear directly from the people who made the decisions. But Mom and Dad had already used secrecy as a financial strategy, and Olivia was the managing member of the company. She was not a child being protected from a scary bill. She was 30 years old and legally responsible for the business she operated. The HELOC is around $172,000, I said. Olivia stopped breathing loudly enough for me to notice the silence. Then she said, That can't all be because of the boutique. I didn't say it was. How much of it is? I don't have a complete allocation. I know there are multiple transfers from family accounts into Juniper and Lace. She whispered something I could not hear. I said, What? Mom said they were fine. I looked down at the table. Mom has said a lot of things. Olivia did not respond. I could have pushed harder. Part of me wanted to. I wanted to unload every document, every number, every text, and make her absorb the entire situation in one sitting. I wanted her to finally understand what it felt like to discover that Mom had been moving pieces behind everyone's backs. But anger is not the same thing as strategy. If I flooded Olivia with everything at once, she would either shut down or decide I was using financial documents to punish her. So I chose one fact. One more thing, I said. Then I'm done for now. What? Do you remember the roof repair Mom and Dad were supposed to do in late 2024? Sort of. I gave them $15,000 for it. Olivia said nothing. The roof work never happened. What are you saying? I'm saying most of that money went into Juniper and Lace. That's not true. It is. No, it isn't. I confirmed the contractor was never hired. Dad admitted where the money went. That stopped her. I heard a door close on her end of the call. Then, very quietly, she said, Dad told you that? Yes. Did you know they were using your money for me? No. There was another silence. I didn't know it was yours, she said. I believe you. That surprised her. I could hear it in the way she inhaled. Then I added, But you knew they kept rescuing the store. Her voice hardened slightly. They invested in it. They did both. That's not the same thing. No, it isn't. Which is why you need to look at the difference. Olivia did not answer. For the first time since she called, we were not fighting. We were standing on opposite sides of the same missing information. I said, How much did Mom tell you about the bank meeting Monday? She said the bank was putting pressure on Dad. Did she tell you why? Because the line is behind. Did she tell you the accountant recommended discussing a wind-down months ago? What? There was no way to soften it now. The accountant told them in December they needed to bring all LLC members together and discuss whether keeping the business open made sense. That didn't happen. I know. Why didn't they tell me? That's a question for them. Olivia's voice rose. You're telling me Mom and Dad had some secret meeting about shutting down my business? No. I'm telling you the accountant wrote them and said all three of you needed a meeting. Dad agreed. Mom delayed it. Why? I let the silence answer first. Then I said, She said you couldn't take another failure. Olivia did not speak for several seconds. When she finally did, the anger in her voice was different. It was no longer pointed entirely at me. She said that? Yes. Those exact words? Close enough that I'm comfortable repeating them. I'll show you the email if you want. Olivia said, I do. I told her I would send the relevant page. She asked for all of it. I said no. That immediately brought some of the fight back. Why not? Because I'm not going to dump documents on you without context and turn this into me versus mom. Ask Dad to send you the full business packet. You own 51% of the LLC. You should have it. She was quiet again. You think I don't know how to run my own company. I think you should know your own company's debt. That's not the same thing. Good. Then ask for it. I ended the call a few minutes later, without us agreeing on anything beyond that. Joshua came back inside and looked at me. How bad? She knows less than I thought. Does that make you feel better? No. That was the truth. It might have been easier if Olivia had known every number and simply accepted that our parents were draining themselves for her. Then I could have been angry at all three of them equally and moved on. Instead, I was beginning to see something more complicated. Olivia had absolutely benefited from favoritism. She had accepted the resort reservation. She had allowed Mom to shield her from criticism. She had taken financial help without insisting on understanding its full cost. But Mom had also been controlling the flow of information around her. That did not erase Olivia's responsibility. It changed its shape. Later that afternoon, Olivia sent me 3 screenshots. The first was from a text conversation with Mom about 6 months earlier. Olivia had written, Taylor thinks the store is stupid anyway. Mom replied, She's never understood that not everyone wants the safe corporate life. I stared at the message. I had never said the store was stupid. The second screenshot was from around Christmas. Olivia had apparently asked whether Mom and Dad were putting too much into the shop. Mom replied, Your father and I have it handled. Do not worry about numbers right now. Focus on sales. The third screenshot was from February. Olivia had written, Taylor could help if things got worse. Mom replied, Your sister wouldn't help even if we begged. She only cares about protecting what's hers. I read that one twice. Then a third time, I could almost hear Mom's voice saying it. Your sister wouldn't help even if we begged. At that point, Mom had already used money I gave for the roof to help Olivia's business. She had already been watching my condo sale. She had already been planning around the proceeds. And to Olivia, she was describing me as someone who would not help. It was such a clean piece of manipulation that I felt more impressed than shocked. Mom had created a version of each sister for the other. To Olivia, I was judgmental and withholding. To me, Olivia was fragile and incapable of handling hard truths. Then Mom positioned herself in the middle as the person who understood both of us. I called Olivia back. She answered immediately. Where did you get the idea I thought your store was stupid? Mom? Only Mom? Olivia hesitated. Yes. Did I ever say it to you? No. Did Joshua? No. Did Dad? No. I let that sit. Then I said, I've questioned whether the business could support itself. That is not the same as thinking you're stupid for opening it. Olivia sounded tired. I know. I was not expecting that. She continued. I'm starting to understand that. There was no apology yet. I did not ask for one. She said, Mom told me you thought Dad was throwing money away on me. Did she tell you Dad lied to me to get some of that money? No. Did she tell you how much was on the HELOC? No. Did she tell you they personally guaranteed the bank line? No. Did she tell you an accountant wanted to meet with you in December? No. The last answer came out almost as a whisper. I said, Then you need to decide what you want to know, not what Mom thinks you can handle. Olivia exhaled slowly. I'm going to ask Dad. That's your call. What if he lies? Ask for documents. She gave a short, bitter laugh. You really do sound like you're at work. Documents are less likely to feel guilty. That made her laugh for real. Just for a second. It was the first normal sound between us in days. Then she said, Taylor? Yeah? Why didn't you ever tell me Mom said things about me? I frowned. What things? That I couldn't handle stuff. That she was always protecting me. Because I thought you knew. She went quiet. I realized then that I had made assumptions too. Not about whether Olivia was favored. That part was obvious. but about how much of the family narrative she saw from the inside. I had always believed Olivia knew exactly how Mom talked about her when she was not around. Apparently she did not. I knew she worried about me, Olivia said. I didn't know she was telling you I'd fall apart. She didn't use those words every time. But that's what she meant. I did not deny it. The conversation ended without resolution, but something had shifted. Olivia was no longer asking me to save the boutique. She was asking what had been hidden from her. That evening, Dad sent me more records. Not everything, but enough. The business had been losing money in waves for more than a year. Good sales periods were repeatedly followed by inventory purchases that wiped out the improvement. Mom and Dad had covered shortfalls, sometimes directly, sometimes through the HELOC. The pattern was not one disastrous decision. It was a dozen smaller decisions that all depended on the next month being better. I could understand how people got trapped in that kind of thinking. One more season, one more vendor cycle, one more marketing push, one more loan payment, one more chance for Olivia to prove everyone wrong. What I could not understand was why Mom had decided I should be the person paying for the last extension. Then Olivia sent me another screenshot. I almost ignored it because it was late, but the message preview showed my name. The screenshot was from a conversation between Olivia and Mom 5 days before the wedding. Olivia had written, "Are you sure Dad's okay? He's been weird all week." Mom replied, "He's stressed about the bank. After the wedding, Taylor will finally have the cash available. We just need to get through this weekend." I stared at the timestamp. 5 days before my wedding. Before the resort reservation was transferred. Before Dad told me Olivia needed the trip more. Before Mom stood in front of me and acted like changing the honeymoon was a spontaneous act of kindness toward her younger daughter. The plan was already moving. I called Olivia. She answered quietly. "Did you know what she meant by this?" "No." "What did you think cash available meant?" I assumed she meant the condo sale. "Did you think I had agreed to help?" Olivia hesitated. "I thought maybe you would." "That's not what I asked." "No, I didn't think you'd agreed yet. Did you ask Mom?" "No." "Why not?" "I don't know." I waited. Then Olivia said, "Because I guess I assumed if Mom was talking about it like that, she had a reason." That answer mattered. Olivia had not invented the plan. She had not signed me up. But she had lived inside Mom's confidence for so long that if Mom spoke as though something would happen, Olivia rarely asked whether the person affected had actually agreed. I said, "That's the problem. I know." For the first time, she sounded like she did. Then she said, "I want to ask you something, and I need you not to give me the nice answer." "I'm listening." "Did you ever think I deserved all of it?" I knew what she meant. Not the business. Everything. The attention. The rescue. The way Mom rearranged things around her. I took a breath. "I thought you got more than I did." "That's not the same answer." "No." Silence. Then she asked, "Did you resent me?" "Yes." The word came out cleanly. I did not dress it up. Olivia went quiet. "I didn't resent every good thing that happened to you," I said. "I resented how often somebody else had to lose something to make sure you didn't." She did not defend herself. "That was new." I continued. "And I resented being told I was stronger whenever strength became the reason I should give something up." Olivia said, "Mom always said you didn't care about that stuff." "What stuff?" "Attention. Traditions. Who got what?" "She said you were above it." I laughed softly. That was convenient. I'm starting to see that. I leaned back in the chair. "Olivia, I need you to understand something. I am not trying to take your business away from you. I know. You need to decide what to do with Juniper and Lace once you see the numbers. I know. And if the numbers say it should close, that won't be because I wanted you to fail. I know." She said it 3 times. And each one sounded harder. Then she asked, "What if they really do have to sell the house?" That question hurt more than the others because the house belonged to both of our childhoods, even if neither of us owned it. "I don't know yet," I said. "You could stop it." There it was. The thought neither of us could avoid. I might be able to delay it. That isn't the same thing. "No." Olivia was quiet. Then she said, "Mom made it sound like you could save everything if you wanted to." That's what she needs to believe. Why? Because if I can save everything, then she doesn't have to admit some things shouldn't be saved. Olivia did not answer. I thought about the boutique, the house, Mom's idea of herself, the version of Olivia she had been protecting since adolescence, the version of me she had been using because I was supposedly too strong to need protection. Then Olivia said, "I'm going to call Dad tomorrow and ask for the business statements." "Good. If he won't send them, you're the managing member. Ask the accountant directly." There was a long pause. I should have done that already. Yes. I could hear how much the answer stung. I did not soften it. Not because I wanted to hurt her. Because this was the first conversation we had ever had where Olivia seemed willing to hear the truth without Mom translating it first. She said goodnight. I thought the conversation was over. Then another screenshot appeared. This one was older, from months before the wedding. Mom had written to Olivia, "Don't bring up finances with Taylor. She's already decided you're irresponsible, and I don't want her making you feel worse." Below it, Olivia had replied, "Fine." I stared at that one for a while. There it was again. Mom telling Olivia what I thought. Mom telling me what Olivia could handle. Mom deciding which conversations should never happen. It was not just financial enabling. It was information control. And for years, both of us had participated by trusting her version more than we trusted each other enough to ask directly. I did not blame myself for what Mom had done. I did not blame myself for Olivia's business. But I could see now how efficiently the system worked when nobody compared notes. The next morning, Olivia texted me before I was awake. "Dad sent the statements." A minute later, "I didn't know." Then another, "I really didn't know." I waited before answering. I did not tell her it was okay. I did not tell her none of it was her fault. Both would have been dishonest. I wrote, "I believe you didn't know the full picture." Olivia responded almost immediately. "That's not the same as saying I did nothing wrong." No. She did not argue. A few minutes later, another message arrived. I knew they kept helping. I just never asked how. I read that slowly. That was the first time Olivia had taken responsibility without attaching an excuse. I wrote, "That matters." She replied, "I know." I put the phone down. For most of my life, Mom had described Olivia to me as someone who could not survive hard truths. Maybe she had been wrong. Or maybe people became exactly as fragile as you expected them to be when you spent long enough removing every chance for them to discover otherwise. I still did not trust Olivia completely. I was still angry that she had accepted the resort reservation. I still remembered every time she had taken Mom's favoritism as though it were simply the natural order of things. But now there was a distinction I could not ignore. Olivia had benefited from a system. Mom had designed it. Dad had funded it. And I had just discovered that Mom had spent years making sure the two daughters most affected by it rarely saw the same information at the same time. That afternoon, Olivia sent one final screenshot from before the wedding. It was the message I had already seen, but this time she included the full exchange. Olivia had asked Mom whether Dad was worried about the bank. Mom replied, "He is. But after the wedding, Taylor will finally have the cash available. Once she sees what's at stake, she'll do what she always does." Olivia had responded with one word. "Okay." I stared at the screen. Once she sees what's at stake, she'll do what she always does. That was more than confidence. It was expectation. My mother had not been hoping I would help. She had already budgeted me into the rescue. By the time Joshua and I flew back to Charlotte, my condo sale had closed. The wire had landed on Friday exactly as scheduled. And for the first time in my life, I had more than $100,000 sitting in an account with my name on it. Under different circumstances, I would have spent the flight home thinking about neighborhoods, mortgage rates, and the house Joshua and I hoped to buy together. Instead, every time I looked at the balance, I heard Mom's message in my head. Once she sees what's at stake, she'll do what she always does. The money did not feel like freedom yet. It felt like something my family had already assigned a purpose to without asking me. We did not go straight from the airport to my parents' house. That was deliberate. I unpacked. I did laundry. Joshua went through the mail with me. We ordered dinner and spent one quiet evening in our own space before I called Dad. Mom had left 2 voicemails asking when I planned to come deal with this, but I had learned enough during the honeymoon to stop treating urgency in her voice as proof that something required immediate action. The bank had not foreclosed on anyone. No payment deadline was expiring that night. Juniper and Lace was still open. My parents had choices. I wanted to meet Dad when I was rested enough to hear what he said instead of reacting to how guilty he sounded saying it. He asked me to come by the next afternoon. I told Joshua he did not have to come. He said he knew, and that was the end of it. There was never any question that I could handle a conversation with my father. Before I left, Joshua only asked whether I wanted him home when I got back. I said yes. That was support to me, not standing beside me like a bodyguard, but being there when the adrenaline wore off. Driving toward my parents' neighborhood felt stranger than I expected. I had made that route hundreds of times. I knew which intersection backed up after school let out, which gas station Dad refused to use because he thought their prices were always 10 cents too high, which turn gave me the first glimpse of the trees lining our street. Nothing looked different, but now I knew the house itself had been serving as collateral for decisions I had never been told about. Dad was waiting at the kitchen table when I arrived. Mom was not in the room. That alone told me he had arranged the meeting carefully. He stood when I walked in and started toward me as if he might hug me, then stopped. I appreciated that. I was not ready to perform reassurance for him just because we were standing in the kitchen where he had once packed my lunches. "Thanks for coming," he said. I said I would. He nodded toward the chair across from him. A folder sat on the table between us. For a few seconds, neither of us touched it. Dad looked older than he had at the wedding. I knew stress could do that, but I also knew I was seeing him differently. Before the honeymoon, I had still thought of him as the quieter parent, the one who got pulled behind Mom's decisions and tried to keep everyone calm. After the roof money, I could not use that explanation so generously anymore. He rubbed one hand over his face. "I'm sorry about how all of this happened." I said nothing. He continued. "Your mother was scared. Olivia was already under so much pressure, and the bank started pushing harder and— Dad," he stopped. "If you're going to apologize, don't start by explaining Mom." His eyes dropped to the table. "I'm not saying she handled it right. I'm not asking whether she handled it right." He nodded slowly. Then he said, "You were always the one we could count on." The sentence was meant kindly. I knew that because of his voice. Years earlier, I might have accepted it as praise. This time I heard the accounting underneath it. "What does that mean?" I asked. Dad frowned. "You keep saying I was the one you could count on. What did that actually mean in practice?" He looked genuinely confused by the question. "It meant you were responsible. And you didn't panic. You handled things. And?" Dad shifted in his chair. I waited. Finally he said, "Olivia took things harder." There it was. I leaned back slightly. "So, when Mom got upset, you tried to calm her?" "Yes. When Olivia got upset, you protected her." Dad's jaw tightened. "And when I got upset?" He looked at me. "You expected me to get over it. That's not fair." "Is it wrong?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. I looked around the kitchen while he thought. The room had changed over the years, but not enough to erase what it had been. The cabinets were newer. The countertops had been replaced. The table was not the one we had when I was a child, but I could still see where the old one had stood, the one where I finished school projects while Mom cooked dinner and Dad read utility bills. On the pantry trim, the pencil marks were still there. Taylor, age 9. Olivia, âge 6. Taylor, 12. Olivia, 10. Mom had written the dates beside some of them in tiny handwriting. I had forgotten they were still there. Dad followed my eyes. "You remember when you got mad because Olivia's mark jumped past yours one summer?" I smiled despite myself. She stood on her toes. She absolutely did. For a moment, we were just father and daughter again. That was what made all of this harder. The house was not a symbol I could dismiss, because Mom had weaponized it. It was where Dad taught me how to balance a checkbook before I understood why anyone would still use one. It was where Mom slept on the couch beside me when I had the flu because I was afraid to be alone. It was where Olivia and I fought over bathroom time. borrowed each other's clothes without permission, and once spent an entire Christmas Eve trying to stay awake long enough to catch our parents carrying presents downstairs. There had been real love in that house. That did not make the debt imaginary. Dad looked back at me. I know we leaned on you. You did more than lean. I know. You asked the person who complained least to give up the most. His face changed. I had not planned the sentence. It came from somewhere I had been trying not to look too closely at for years. Dad stared at the folder. After a while, he said, "That's probably true." Probably? He closed his eyes briefly. "It's true." I let him say it. "I kept thinking you'd be okay." He continued, "If something disappointed you, you adjusted. If we told Olivia no, it became a whole thing. If Nancy got upset, the whole house changed. You were easier to talk to, so you made me pay for being easier." Dad looked at me sharply. "I didn't think of it that way. I know." That was the tragedy of it. He had not sat down years earlier and decided to build an unfair family system. He had simply taken the path of least resistance over and over until the path became permanent. Mom reacted the biggest, so everyone adapted around her. Olivia reacted the hardest, so everyone protected her. I reacted the least, so everyone assumed I could absorb more. Dad leaned forward. "I'm not asking you for 100,000 anymore." The word "anymore" mattered. "What are you asking for?" He opened the folder. "There may be a smaller number that buys us enough time to stabilize things." I almost laughed. "Dad, you're still using the phrase buy time. I know how it sounds. It sounds exactly like what the accountant warned you not to do." He pulled out a handwritten page. "If we paid down part of the line, caught up the HELOC, and covered the most urgent vendors, it would relieve pressure, maybe 35 or 40,000. For how long?" He hesitated. "Several months." "What changes during those months?" "We reduce inventory." "Is Olivia agreeing to that?" "Not yet." "Is there a closure date?" "No." "Is the house being listed?" "No." "Has Mom agreed not to put more money into the store?" Dad's silence answered. I pushed the paper back toward him. "That's not a plan. It gives us breathing room." "No. It gives you another period where everyone can avoid the decision." Dad looked frustrated. "Taylor, we are trying." "I know, but trying is not the same thing as changing." He sat back. I could tell part of him wanted me to appreciate that he had reduced the ask from 100,000 to 40. To him, that probably felt like compromise. To me, it was still my future being used to delay someone else's consequences. I said, "If I give you 40,000 today, what prevents this exact conversation from happening again in July?" Dad looked down. That was the answer. "Nothing." I softened my voice, but not the boundary. "I am willing to help you understand options. I'll sit with you and go through the numbers. I'll help compare retirement budgets. I'll help look at closing costs. I'll help find a financial advisor if you want one. I'm not giving you cash without an exit plan everyone is actually following." Dad nodded slowly. He did not like it, but he understood it. Then he opened the folder again and pulled out a thicker packet. "I brought this because you asked about the house." I recognized the realtor's name from the emails he had forwarded. The packet included the comparative market analysis, a seller net sheet, recent comparable sales, and several pages showing condo price ranges in nearby neighborhoods. This was more detailed than what I had seen on my phone in Puerto Rico. Dad had done real homework. The estimated sale value of the house was around $640,000. The mortgage and HELOC would consume a large portion of the proceeds, but not all of them. Even after estimated selling costs, the numbers left my parents with enough to move into a smaller condo and retain a meaningful reserve. Not the lifestyle they had now. Not this house, but stability. I ran my finger down the estimated net proceeds. "You knew this in January." Dad nodded. "You knew you could get out." "I knew it was an option. An option that doesn't make you homeless." "No." "An option that doesn't wipe out retirement entirely." "No." "An option that lets you deal with the guaranteed business debt without using my condo money." Dad rubbed his thumb against the edge of the paper. "If the house sells in the expected range, yes." That phrase mattered too. Expected range. Nothing in real estate was guaranteed until closing. But this was not fantasy math. A professional had given them a plausible path. So what happened? Dad looked toward the hallway. I already knew. I told Nancy we should call the realtor back after New Year's, he said. List before spring inventory orders. Tell Olivia everything. Stop the store before the losses got worse. And? She said no. Why? You know why. I want you to say it. Dad leaned back and stared toward the pantry. She didn't want to leave. That's not enough. He frowned. She didn't want the neighbors asking questions. She didn't want your aunt knowing. She didn't want people at church hearing we'd sold because of debt. There it was. Not survival. Visibility. I looked around the kitchen again. I understood the attachment. I felt it myself. But Mom's attachment had become something else. She was willing to risk my money to avoid the humiliation of letting people see the family shrink. Dad continued. She said if we could get through the wedding, we'd have more options. My condo. Yes. And you went along with it? For too long. For all the way through my wedding. He flinched. Yes. I picked up the realtor packet again. There were notes in Dad's handwriting on one page. Monthly HOA estimate. Property tax. Distance to their doctors. Grocery stores. He had even circled 2 condo developments. You weren't just thinking about this, I said. You were planning it. I was. Then why did you let Mom tell me there was no alternative? Dad's expression tightened. I didn't know she would say it that way. You knew she expected me to fund the alternative she wanted. Yes. And you knew I hadn't agreed. Yes. That word cost him. It should have. I closed the folder. I'm not saving the house just so Mom doesn't have to admit selling it makes financial sense. Dad nodded. I know. Do you? I do now. The hallway floor creaked. Both of us turned. Mom stood at the kitchen entrance. I had no idea how long she had been there. Her face was pale with anger. She looked at Dad, not me. You showed her that? Dad straightened. Nancy. The realtor packet. Yes. Mom's eyes moved to the folder on the table. You had no right. Dad's expression changed in a way I had rarely seen. Not defiant. Just tired. She's being asked to put money into this. She has a right to know the options. Mom came fully into the kitchen. I thought we agreed that was private. I said, you asked me to use most of my condo proceeds to keep this house. The fact that selling it is a viable alternative is not irrelevant. Mom ignored me. Her focus stayed on Dad. You're making me look like I'm refusing some simple solution. Dad said, it isn't simple. Then why are you handing her paperwork like it is? Because it exists. Mom's mouth tightened. That was the first moment I understood how much of her power depended on information staying separated. If Dad knew one version, Olivia another, and I knew only what Mom chose to tell me, then Mom could remain the person translating the crisis for everyone. The moment we all started seeing the same documents, her version became one version among several. She turned to me. Are you happy now? I looked at her. No. That seemed to surprise her. I don't want this house sold, I said. I don't want you and Dad stressed. I don't want Olivia's business to fail. I don't enjoy any of this. Then help. I am helping. Mom gave a bitter laugh. By refusing money? By refusing to finance another delay. She folded her arms. You make everything sound so easy when it's not your life being dismantled. I looked around the kitchen. This is part of my life too. Her expression flickered. I continued. You think I don't care because I'm willing to let the house be sold if that's the responsible option. I care enough that this is hard. Not hard enough. There it was again. Pain as proof. If I was willing to make the decision, then clearly I was not hurting enough. Dad said, Nancy, stop. She turned toward him. No. She gets to sit there with $126,000 while we lose the home we built, and I'm supposed to thank her for explaining finances to me? It's her money, Dad said. Mom looked at him as if he had betrayed something sacred. I watched the two of them and realized this conversation was not going to become productive. I stood. I'm leaving. Mom said, Of course you are. I picked up my purse. Dad, keep the realtor packet. I have the digital copy. He nodded. As I reached the hallway, I stopped beside the pantry. The height marks were close enough to touch. For one irrational second, I imagined a stranger painting over them after the house sold. That image hurt. I did not let the pain make the decision for me. Mom had been counting on exactly that. When I got home, Joshua was there. He did not ask whether Dad had convinced me. He asked, "How was it?" I sat beside him on the couch. Worse and better. He waited. Dad finally admitted they kept asking me because I was easier to disappoint. Joshua's expression tightened. And the house? They have a real exit. I told him about the realtor packet. About the projected equity. About the condo developments Dad had circled. About Mom overhearing us. Joshua listened, without interrupting. Then I said, "Part of me still wants to save it." He nodded. "I know. I could save the address." It was the first time I had said it that way. Joshua looked at me. And what would happen after? I already knew. The boutique would still have problems. Mom would still believe Olivia needed protecting. Dad would still be tempted to smooth conflict. The next crisis would arrive wearing a different name. I leaned back and closed my eyes. "I'd save the address," I said, "not the problem." Joshua squeezed my hand. That was all. Later that night, Dad sent one more message. "I'm sorry she hurt us like that. But I'm not taking back what I told you." A second message followed. "I called the realtor before your wedding because I thought selling was the responsible thing. Your mother made me cancel the follow-up." I stared at the screen. I already knew most of that. But there was a difference between suspecting Mom had resisted the sale and hearing Dad say she had actively stopped the next step. Before I could answer, another message appeared. This one was from Mom. "You have no idea what your father is doing to this family." I read it once and put the phone down. For years, Dad had avoided conflict by asking me to absorb more. Now, for the first time, he had handed me information Mom wanted controlled, and Mom had heard him do it. The money had not changed hands. The house had not been listed. The boutique had not closed. But something inside my parents' kitchen had already shifted. Mom was no longer the only person deciding which version of the truth each of us was allowed to see. Mom did not call me again that night, but Dad did the next morning. He sounded like someone who had slept badly and spent the first hour of the day regretting several years' worth of decisions at once. He told me he and Mom had argued after I left, then stopped himself and said, "I'm not going to give you a play-by-play. That wouldn't be fair." I appreciated that more than he probably realized. I did not need another private conversation turned into ammunition. I only needed to know whether anything had changed. Dad said he had told Mom he wanted to call Olivia, show her the full books, stop new inventory, and ask her to agree to an orderly wind down. After that, he wanted to call the realtor back and move forward with selling the house before more equity disappeared. "What did Mom say?" I asked. Dad was quiet for a moment. She said I was giving up on Olivia. I asked whether he had changed his mind. "No," he said. "For once. I think waiting is the more dangerous choice." That afternoon, Mom called me herself. Her tone was completely different from the one she had used in the kitchen. She sounded tired, almost gentle. She asked whether I remembered Christmas mornings in the house when Olivia and I were little. She reminded me of the year Dad brought home a tree too tall for the living room and had to cut 6 inches off the bottom in the driveway, while Mom complained that pine needles were everywhere. She talked about my graduation pictures on the front steps, the kitchen where she had made my favorite soup whenever I was sick, the bedroom upstairs where I had slept through thunderstorms as a child. None of those memories were inventions. That was what made the call so effective. She was not manipulating me with fake sentiment. She was taking things I genuinely loved and placing them between me and the decision she wanted. "I know you think this is just numbers," she said. "I don't. It sounds like you do. I know what that house means to me." "Then how can you stand by while your father sells it?" I closed my eyes. "Because loving a house doesn't automatically make keeping it the responsible choice." Mom's voice tightened slightly. "Responsible. You always have a word that makes things sound clean. There's nothing clean about this." "Then help us." I could hear the trap before she finished the sentence. The same equation again. If the house mattered, money proved it. If I would not pay, then my memories must not matter enough. I am helping, I said. I'm willing to go through the numbers, help you compare condos, sit with a financial advisor, help with the logistics of moving. I am not putting my house money into Juniper and Lace so you can delay making a decision. You keep saying your house money. It is my house money. You already had a home. We're talking about the one where you grew up. That sentence stayed with me after the call ended. An hour later, I drove over there alone. I did not tell Mom I was coming. I used the old key I had carried since college and stepped into the quiet hallway. Dad's car was gone, and Mom had apparently gone out too. For the first time in days, I could look at the house without anyone narrating what it was supposed to mean. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner. A bowl of fruit sat on the counter. The back door still stuck slightly before opening, just as it had when I was a teenager. I walked to the pantry and ran my thumb near the pencil marks, showing our height. Some were faded. Mom had written dates beside several of them in blue ink. Upstairs, my old bedroom had become a guest room years ago, but the light still fell across the floor the same way in the afternoon. I remembered studying for finals there, crying after my first serious breakup, lying awake the night before leaving for college because I was suddenly terrified to go. I remembered Mom sitting on the edge of the bed when I had a fever in middle school. I remembered Dad standing in the doorway the day I moved out, trying not to make a speech because he knew I hated sentimental speeches. It hurt to imagine strangers living there. That was the honest part. I could afford to feel sentimental because someone else would pay for keeping the sentiment intact. That was the dangerous part. I stood in the kitchen for a long time before I left. On the drive home, I kept thinking about one fact. I probably could help them keep the house for now. $40,000 would buy time. $100,000 would buy more. I had enough money sitting in an account to make the immediate pressure softer. That did not mean I could solve the business, restore the HELOC, repair their retirement position, or turn Olivia into a profitable owner. I could save the address. I could not save the structure underneath it. When I told Joshua that, he did not tell me what to choose. He sat beside me on the couch and listened while I described walking through the house. I could save the address, I said. Saying it aloud made the temptation more real. I could write a check, and for a while nothing would change. Joshua nodded. And what would that save besides the address? I already knew the answer. Nothing. He did not smile like I had passed a test. He only took my hand. Later that evening, Dad called. He said he had tried again with Mom. This time he had laid out the exit plan as plainly as possible. Show Olivia the books. Stop placing new orders. Let Olivia, as managing member, decide whether to agree to the wind down after seeing the numbers. Call the realtor. List the house. Pay off the mortgage and HELOC at closing. Use the remaining proceeds to resolve the business guarantee and vendor exposure, then move into something smaller that fit their retirement income. It would hurt. It would be embarrassing for Mom. It would also leave them housed, solvent enough to recover, and no longer feeding money into a business the accountant had warned them about. What would she have to agree to? I asked. Mostly that we stop pretending this can continue the way it has. And Dad was quiet, and that we tell Olivia everything. That was the real threshold. Mom could tolerate financial pain more easily than she could tolerate losing control of the story. Dad said he had told her they could still handle the sale privately and respectfully. They did not have to announce their finances to anyone. They could simply say they were downsizing in retirement, which was true. They could help Olivia close the store without humiliating her. They could accept the consequences without turning them into a public spectacle. I asked. Did she agree? No. What did she say? Dad hesitated. I'm only telling you this because it affects you directly. Okay. She said there was no reason to blow up the family when you could fix this. I said nothing, Dad continued. Her exact words were, Taylor can fix this. There it was. Even after the HELOC statements. Even after the accountant's recommendation. Even after the realtor's numbers. Even after the roof money. even after Dad himself was finally willing to admit the current plan had failed. Mom still did not see selling the house and closing the boutique as the solution. She saw me refusing to write a check as the obstacle preventing the real solution. That was the moment my remaining uncertainty disappeared. She had been given an exit that kept a roof over her head, protected what remained of retirement, gave Olivia a chance to stop digging deeper, and required nothing from me except ordinary family support. She rejected it because the exit included consequences. Then I'm not changing my answer, I said. Dad sighed. I know. Do you? Yes. For once, he did not ask me to reconsider for Mom's sake. 2 days later, Mom sent a group message inviting us to dinner at the house. The group included me, Joshua, Olivia, Dad, my Aunt Elaine, and my Uncle Mark. Elaine was Mom's older sister, and one of the few people in the family whose opinion I had cared about since childhood. Mark had been friends with Dad before he married Mom. Neither of them belonged in a private discussion about Juniper and Lace unless someone wanted witnesses. Mom wrote, "We need to sit down as a family and decide whether this family still means anything to all of us." I read the message twice. Joshua looked over my shoulder. "That sounds productive." I laughed despite myself. Very. I knew exactly what Mom was doing. Numbers had not moved me. Memories had not moved me. Dad had stopped reinforcing her version. Olivia was beginning to ask questions. So Mom was widening the audience. She wanted the conflict moved out of the bank statements and back into morality. Family helps family. Parents sacrificed for children. The house was a legacy. Taylor had money. Taylor refused to help. With enough people at the table, maybe those sentences would feel heavier than the ones about guarantees, hidden debt, and the accountant's recommendation. I replied that Joshua and I would come. Mom answered with a heart emoji. That made me trust the dinner even less. Dad called afterward and apologized for Elaine and Mark being invited. I told him not to. "You didn't invite them." "No." "Then you don't need to apologize for Mom." He was quiet. "That's something I'm still learning," he said. I hoped he meant it. The night before the dinner, Olivia called me. Her voice sounded different again. Less angry, more careful. She had spent several days reading the business statements Dad finally sent her. Que pita. Que porti. Pita. Poriha. And I knew from her messages that the numbers were hitting her in stages. Every few hours, she discovered something else Mom had described differently. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "Did Dad ever actually want to close my store?" I leaned against the kitchen counter. There were several ways I could have answered. I could have protected Dad by saying it was complicated. I could have protected Olivia by telling her the accountant was the one who raised the idea. I could have protected Mom by making it sound like everyone had been equally uncertain. I was finished protecting people with incomplete versions of the truth. "Yes," I said. "He wanted to show you the full numbers and ask you to close it before the losses got worse." Olivia did not speak, I continued, because accuracy mattered. "He couldn't close it himself. You're the managing member. But he wanted to tell you the truth and recommend a wind down." And Mom stopped him. She delayed the conversation. More than once. I heard Olivia exhale. "How long ago?" "December, formally. Dad says he was seriously thinking about it by January." Another silence. Then Olivia asked, "So when Mom sent me to Asheville, she already knew the accountant wanted you brought into the discussion?" Olivia was quiet for so long that I checked whether the call was still connected. Finally, she said, "She gave me your honeymoon so I wouldn't be there." I looked down at the counter. "That's what Dad told me." Olivia whispered something under her breath. Then she said, "Tomorrow, I'm asking them myself." "Good. You're not going to answer for me?" "No." "And you're not going to protect Dad?" "No." "What about Mom?" "No." Olivia gave a short laugh that sounded almost sad. "Okay." We hung up soon after. The next evening, I would walk into the house with Joshua beside me and find Mom waiting at the table with 2 relatives she believed would help remind me what family meant. But for the first time in years, Olivia and I were going into the same room with the same basic information. Mom had spent a long time making sure that never happened. Olivia texted me the next morning and asked if I could meet her before dinner at Mom and Dad's house. She chose a coffee shop halfway between my place and hers, which I appreciated. I did not want our first honest conversation about juniper and lace happening in the same kitchen where Mom could walk in and redirect it. Joshua knew where I was going, but he did not come. Olivia and I needed to decide what we believed about each other without spouses, parents, or relatives sitting close enough to influence the answer. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a table near the back with her laptop open and a paper cup she had barely touched. The resort trip was over. There was no makeup-perfect vacation smile, no irritation about the parking lot room, none of the confidence she had carried out of my wedding with Mom's reservation. She looked tired. There were several printed pages beside her laptop, covered with notes in her handwriting. I went through everything Dad sent me, she said as soon as I sat down. How much did he send? The business line statements, vendor balances, Mom and Dad's transfers, some of the HELOC activity, and the accountant emails. That's most of what I've seen. She turned the laptop toward me. I want to make sure I'm reading this correctly. It was the December email recommending an orderly wind down. I had already read it enough times that I knew where Olivia's cursor would stop. The accountant had written that current cash flow did not support continued purchasing, that further household exposure increased risk to the guarantors, and that all LLC members needed to review the numbers before any more money went into the business. Olivia pointed to one line. She wanted me in the meeting. Yes. And Dad agreed. Yes. And Mom said not yet. Yes. Olivia leaned back. Why didn't you tell me this the second you saw it? Because it wasn't my business to close, and I wanted you to get the documents from people who actually owned it with you. You knew Mom might not give them to me. I knew Dad would. She looked at me carefully. You trusted Dad? No. I trusted that he had started realizing secrecy was making the situation worse. That distinction seemed to matter to her. She pulled another document toward me. The $82,000 on the Piedmont line, that's real. Yes. And Mom and Dad guaranteed it personally. Yes. I knew there was a line, I didn't know the balance was that high. I believe you. She frowned. You keep saying that, because it matters what you knew and what you didn't. Does it? Yes. It doesn't erase responsibility. It changes what the responsibility is. Olivia looked down at the papers. She had always hated being corrected by me. When we were younger, even something simple like me telling her she had taken the wrong highway exit could turn into a 10-minute argument because she heard correction as judgment. Mom usually stepped in before Olivia had to sit with the discomfort. No one stepped in this time. Olivia opened another file. Dad showed me the realtor numbers. I nodded. The house could really sell for around $640? That was the January estimate. It's a market estimate, not a guarantee. And after the mortgage and HELOC, they should still have substantial equity if the sale lands anywhere near that range. So, Mom wasn't telling the truth when she said they'd have nowhere to go. She said they could lose the house. That part can become true if they keep going. She let everyone hear it as if losing the house meant losing everything. Olivia stared at the screen. There are condos they can afford. Yes, and their retirement income is enough for one. According to the numbers Dad showed me, yes. She rubbed both hands over her face. This is insane. It's expensive. It's not insane. She looked at me. What does that mean? It means there's a logic to every decision. That's what makes it worse. Olivia's expression tightened. I continued. Mom didn't wake up one morning and decide to risk the house. She kept making one more decision. One more season. One more inventory order. One more transfer. One more month before telling you. Every time, she thought the next step would prevent the last step from becoming a failure. Olivia looked toward the window. And I let her. I did not answer. She turned back. Say it. Say what? That I let her. You're asking me to tell you how responsible you are for something you're only now understanding. I'm asking you not to make me feel better. That was new. He sat back. All right. She waited. You didn't know about the roof money. No. You didn't know the full HELOC balance. No. You didn't know Dad had talked to a realtor. No. You didn't know the accountant wanted a wind-down meeting in December. No. But you knew Mom and Dad kept putting money into the store. Olivia's eyes dropped. Yes. You knew they stepped in when you couldn't cover something. Yes. You knew Mom protected you from bad news. She hesitated. Yes. And you knew she treated you differently than me. That answer took longer. Yes. I let the silence stay there. Olivia traced the rim of her cup. I didn't think of it as favoritism when I was younger. What did you think it was? That Mom understood me better. I nodded. That's what she told me too. Olivia looked up. What? She said you needed more. She said I was stronger. I thought she was saying you didn't care. That landed differently. What do you mean? When I got something and you didn't, she'd say you weren't bothered by things like that. That you didn't need attention the way I did. That you were too independent to care. I almost laughed. But there was nothing funny in it. That was convenient. I know. Olivia looked down again. For a while, I believed her. For how long? She did not answer immediately. Then she said, long enough. I waited. She swallowed. There were times I knew. Knew what? That it wasn't fair. Her voice was low now. I knew when Mom took my side before she even heard yours. I knew when Dad would tell you to let something go because I was upset. I knew at your wedding that the Asheville reservation was supposed to be yours. I did not interrupt. Olivia continued. And I took it anyway. Yes. She flinched slightly. But I did not apologize for the answer. I told myself you didn't care, she said. Mom said you could travel later. Dad said the same thing. And you stood there like it didn't matter. It mattered. I know that now. You could have known it then. She nodded. I could have. That was the first apology without the word sorry. I let her keep going. When Mom gave me something you were supposed to have, part of me knew exactly what was happening. I watched her, and her eyes filled, but she did not look away. And I liked winning. The sentence sat between us. Not, I was confused. Not, Mom manipulated me. Not, I didn't understand. I liked winning. It was probably the ugliest honest thing Olivia had ever said to me. She wiped quickly under one eye. That sounds horrible. It sounds honest. I spent years feeling like you were better at everything. School, work, money, decisions. You never seemed to need anybody. So when Mom chose me, I felt like there was one thing I was better at. Being chosen? Yes. I looked at her for a long moment. There were 100 old arguments I could have pulled into that conversation. Birthdays, holidays, family dinners, small traditions that would sound petty one by one and exhausting when stacked together. I did not need them. Olivia had finally named the system herself. You understand why I'm not ready to pretend we're fine, I said. Her face tightened. Yes. I believe you didn't know the full financial picture. I believe Mom kept information from you. I also believe you knew the favoritism existed and sometimes used it. I did. And one honest conversation doesn't erase that. I know. She looked miserable. I did not enjoy it. That mattered to me. I had spent years imagining what it would feel like if Olivia ever admitted I had been treated unfairly. I had expected relief, maybe satisfaction. Instead, I mostly felt tired. I'm sorry, she said. I nodded. I believe you. She waited. I knew what she was waiting for. I did not give it to her. I believe you're sorry, I said. That doesn't mean we're suddenly okay. Olivia's eyes dropped. All right. You want this to change? Yes. Then change what happens next. She looked back at me. How? Start with your business. She stiffened slightly. I expected the reflexive defense. It did not come. I pointed to the accountant's email. You're the managing member. Mom and Dad cannot close Juniper and Lace without you. They also should never have kept you from seeing this. Now you see it. You have to decide what you're going to do with the actual numbers. Olivia stared at the screen. If I close, I lose everything I built. You lose the store. That is what I built. No, it's one thing you built. She looked irritated, then thoughtful. I continued. Closing a business that isn't working doesn't erase the fact that you opened one, learned something, and survived it. Keeping it open with money other people can't afford to lose won't turn it into a success. She pressed her lips together. That sounds like something you've wanted to say for years. It's something I can say now because I actually have the numbers. She nodded reluctantly. We went through the documents for another 20 minutes. I did not tell her what choice to make. I showed her how I had read the cash flow pattern, where the business line had increased, and how liquidation estimates compared with vendor obligations. Olivia knew far more about inventory than I did, and for the first time, I watched her apply that knowledge without Mom standing between her and the consequences. She pointed out what stock could move quickly, what would have to be discounted, and which vendors might negotiate because they would prefer partial payment to a drawn-out default. She was not incapable. She had been protected from having to be capable at the hardest moments. There was a difference. Before we left, Olivia closed the laptop. "What are you going to say tonight?" "The truth." "That's not very specific. I'm going to answer questions about my money, the roof payment, and what I was asked to do. I'm not going to tell Mom what you should do with Juniper and Lace." Olivia nodded. "And you're not going to tell them I'm on your side? Are you?" She paused. "I'm on my own side for once." That answer surprised me. "Good." She looked at me. "What if Mom says I'm betraying her?" "She probably will. What do I say?" "That's yours to decide." Olivia gave a faint smile. "You really aren't going to answer for me?" "No." She stood, gathered the papers, then stopped. "One more thing." "What?" "If Dad starts trying to make himself the good guy because he finally told us the truth, I'm not letting him. Neither am I. And if Mom starts talking about the house like you're the only reason it might be sold, I'll ask questions." Olivia frowned. "That's it?" "That's enough." She understood what I meant. Mom's strongest weapon had always been the version of events she told first. Facts did not need to shout louder. They only needed to stay in the room long enough. We walked outside together and stopped beside our cars. There was still distance between us. I was glad there was. Instant forgiveness would have made the conversation meaningless. Olivia opened her car door, then looked back at me. "I really am sorry about the honeymoon." "I know. I should have handed it back." "Yes." She nodded once. No defense. No explanation. Then she got into her car. My phone buzzed before I reached mine. A group message from Mom. "Dinner is at 6. I expect everyone to come prepared to talk honestly. Tonight we decide whether this family still means anything." I read it standing in the parking lot. A few months later, that message would almost make me laugh. At the time, I only thought one thing. For once, Mom and I wanted exactly the same thing from that dinner. The truth. By the time Joshua and I pulled into my parents' driveway, every light downstairs was on. Mom had always done that before important family dinners, as if a bright house could guarantee a good outcome. Anna Lane's SUV was already parked near the curb, and Uncle Mark's truck was behind Dad's car. I sat for a moment with my hand on the door handle, looking at the house I had walked through alone only days earlier. Nothing about it looked endangered. The porch lights worked. The lawn had been cut. The spring wreath Mom had hung after the wedding was centered perfectly on the front door. If I had known nothing about the HELOC, the business line, the accountant's warnings, or the realtor's numbers, I would have believed what the house had been designed to say for years. "Everything here is fine." Joshua looked at me. "Ready?" "Yes." I was not going in to convince everyone to like my decision. That distinction mattered. I had spent too much of my life explaining myself until people were comfortable with choices that did not belong to them. That night, I only intended to answer for my money, my involvement, and what I knew. Olivia had promised to answer for herself. Dad had promised nothing, but at least he had stopped hiding documents. Mom had invited the audience. Whatever happened after that belonged to all of us. Aunt Elaine hugged me when we entered. She had been one of the adults I trusted growing up because she rarely treated age as proof that someone was right. Uncle Mark shook Joshua's hand and gave me a restrained smile. Neither of them mentioned the reason we were there. Mom had set the dining table even though nobody seemed interested in food. There was roast chicken, potatoes, green beans, and the pie she knew Elaine liked. The normality of it almost irritated me. Mom had turned a financial crisis into a Sunday-style dinner, complete with serving dishes and folded napkins. Olivia arrived a few minutes after us carrying her laptop bag. She looked at me once, then at Dad. Mom immediately said, Can we please have one evening without documents on the table? Olivia set the bag beside her chair. That depends on what gets said. Mom's mouth tightened. That was the first indication the meeting was not going to follow her plan. We ate very little. Mom waited until everyone had food before she folded her hands on the table and looked first at Elaine, then Mark, as if she were making sure the jury was attentive. I asked everyone here because things have gotten completely out of hand, she began. Charles and I are dealing with a financial situation connected to the store. We're not denying that. But what has happened since Taylor's wedding has stopped being about finances and started becoming about whether this family still understands what it means to support one another. I kept my hands in my lap. Mom continued. Taylor left town without telling us where she was going, even after we changed the Asheville reservation, because Olivia desperately needed time away. Then, when we realized the bank situation had become serious, Taylor refused to come home. She has the means to help, but instead, she has spent the last 2 weeks talking about selling the house we raised our daughters in. Aunt Elaine looked at me, but she did not interrupt. Mom took that as permission to keep going. We are not asking Taylor to ruin herself. We are asking for temporary help from money she received after selling her condo. Money she has. Her father and I spent decades building this family, helping both girls whenever they needed us, and now, when we are asking for help one time, we are being treated like irresponsible strangers. I could have answered 5 different accusations at once. I did not. I looked at Dad. When did you first know Juniper and Lace could not support itself without outside money? Mom turned sharply toward me. Taylor, I am speaking. I heard you. This is exactly what I mean. You refuse to engage with anything emotional. I'm engaging with the reason we're sitting here. Uncle Mark cleared his throat but said nothing. Dad looked down at his plate. I repeated the question. When did you know the store could not support itself without outside money? Dad rubbed his palms together under the edge of the table. By last fall, I knew it was serious. Before December? Yes. Mom said, everyone knew the store was having a difficult year. I kept my attention on Dad. When did the accountant recommend discussing a wind down? December. Olivia's shoulders stiffened beside me. Aunt Elaine looked from Dad to Mom. You had an accountant recommending closure in December? Mom answered quickly. She recommended reviewing options. That is not the same thing as ordering us to shut the business. No one said she ordered you, I said. I turned back to Dad. Did the accountant say Olivia should be included in that meeting? Dad nodded. Yes. Did you agree? Yes. Olivia looked at him. And did that meeting happen? No. Mom pushed her chair back slightly. Because timing matters. Olivia was under enormous pressure. Christmas sales were complicated, and then Taylor's wedding was coming. I was trying to keep everyone from falling apart at once. Olivia said, You mean me? Mom looked at her. I was protecting you. Olivia's jaw tightened, but she did not respond yet. I continued, Dad, what happened to the $15,000 I gave you for the roof? The room changed immediately. Elaine turned toward him. Mom said, Oh, for God's sake, we've already gone through that. Elaine and Mark haven't. You brought them into this, I said. If you want them here to decide whether I'm refusing to help family, they should know what happened the last time I gave family money. Dad looked at me. Then he looked at Elaine. Most of it went into Juniper and Lace. Elaine blinked. You told Taylor it was for the roof? Dad nodded. Mark leaned back in his chair. Mom said, the roof needed work. The estimate was real. We had a cash flow emergency at the store, and we redirected the money temporarily. Without telling me, I said. Mom waved one hand. Because you would have turned it into exactly this. I almost answered, then stopped. There was no need. Dad did it for me. She gave us the money for the roof, he said. I told her the repair couldn't wait. I shouldn't have done that. Mom stared at him. You are making this sound like fraud. I'm saying I lied to her. There was no anger in his voice. That made the admission heavier. Elaine asked quietly. Did you ever pay her back? Dad shook his head. Mom said. Olivia's head turned toward her. The phrase sounded different in a room where everyone now knew what it meant. I asked Dad, how much is on the business line? Around 80, 2,000. Personally guaranteed by? Your mother and me. And the HELOC? About 172,000. Elaine put down her fork. Mark said, "How much of that is tied to the store?" Dad answered carefully, "Not every dollar. Some was household work and other expenses, but a significant portion of the borrowing supported the business directly or helped us cover household costs while more cash went into the business." That was the most accurate answer he could give, without pretending the funds had stayed in separate buckets. Mom looked at Elaine. "You see why this is serious." Elaine said, "I see why it should have been serious before Taylor's wedding." Mom did not answer. Olivia opened her laptop bag. Mom immediately said, "Olivia, please." "No." The word came out quietly. Olivia took out several printed statements and placed them in front of her. "When were you going to tell me?" Mom looked wounded. "I was trying to protect you. That's not a date. After things stabilized." Olivia looked down at one of the statements. Were they ever going to stabilize without Taylor's money? Mom's face hardened. "That is not fair." Olivia gave a short laugh. "I have spent the last week finding out that apparently fair was whatever information you thought I could handle." Dad said, "Liv." "No, Dad, you don't get to smooth this out." He went silent. Olivia looked at Mom again. "You told me the bank line was manageable." "It was, until sales slowed." "You told me you and Dad had the investment under control?" "We thought we did." "You told me not to worry about the numbers, because you needed to focus on the store." "I owned 51% of the company." Mom's eyes flashed. "And you were working 12-hour days trying to keep it alive. That doesn't mean I didn't need to know what it was costing." Mom looked around the table, as if someone should intervene. No one did. I could see the moment she tried to move the conversation somewhere safer. "This is what Taylor has done," she said. "She has turned every one of us against each other. Before this wedding, we were a family. Now Charles is sending private financial documents behind my back. Olivia is talking about closing her own business, and Taylor sits there acting like she had nothing to do with any of it." I did not defend myself. I asked one question. Was selling the house ever a realistic option? Mom answered immediately. "No." Dad's head lifted. I turned toward him. "Dad?" He looked at Mom first, then at me. "Yes." The room went completely still. Mom said, "Charles." He continued anyway. "I spoke to a realtor in January." Mark leaned forward. "You had the place valued?" "Not formally appraised. Comparative market analysis. Estimated around $640,000 depending on the market." "And your debt against it?" Dad gave the numbers. He explained the mortgage balance, the HELOC, estimated selling costs, the remaining equity range. He explained that the realtor had sent him several smaller condo options nearby that would fit within their retirement income. Not luxurious. Not this neighborhood. Not the house where they had raised us. But viable. Elaine asked, "So selling would pay off the mortgage and the HELOC?" "Assuming the house sells near the expected range, yes." "And leave you with something afterward?" "Yes," Mom said. "Something. Not enough to replace what we lose." Dad turned toward her. "Nancy, we would have somewhere to live." "That isn't the point." The words left her mouth quickly. I watched Elaine's expression change. Mom realized it too late. She tried to recover. "The point is that we should not have to throw away 30 years because Olivia's business hit trouble and Taylor refuses to help us through one bad period." "One bad period?" Olivia asked. Mom ignored her. I asked Dad, "When did you first think selling was the responsible choice?" "January." "Did you want to tell Olivia the full business numbers then?" "Yes." "Did you want to stop putting household money into the store?" "Yes." "Did you want to list the house?" "Yes." Mom shoved her napkin onto the table. "And you did none of those things, Charles, so stop pretending you were some voice of reason." Dad flinched. Then, to his credit, he did not retreat. "You're right." Everyone looked at him. He took a slow breath. "I signed the HELOC. I moved money. I lied to Taylor about the roof. I knew Nancy was planning around Taylor's condo closing. I knew she believed taking away the Asheville reservation would keep Taylor in Charlotte. I went along with all of it because every time I tried to force a decision, the argument got worse." He looked at me. "And I kept telling myself Taylor would be fine." Mom closed her eyes. Dad continued. I kept asking the daughter who complained least to give up the most. The words landed harder in that room than they had when I first said them to him. I did not thank him. I did not tell him I understood. Acknowledging the pattern did not undo the choices. Olivia stared at Dad for several seconds. Then she asked, "Did you know Mom was telling me Taylor thought my store was stupid?" Dad frowned. "What?" Olivia pulled up a screenshot and turned the laptop toward him. "Dad, read it." I never knew she said that. Mom said, "I was summarizing Taylor's attitude." "No," I said. "You were inventing words I never used." Mom looked at me. "You never believed in that business." "I didn't believe the business could ignore its numbers forever." "That's different." Olivia looked at Mom. "You also told me Taylor wouldn't help even if you begged." Mom crossed her arms. "Well, was I wrong?" Olivia shook her head. "You had already used her roof money." Mom looked as though Olivia had struck her. "I was protecting you." Olivia's voice cracked for the first time. "From what?" "Knowing what my own store was doing?" "From feeling like you failed." "I did fail at some things." Mom's face changed. Olivia swallowed. "I bought too much inventory. I kept telling myself the next season would fix the last one. I didn't ask enough questions because every time I got scared, you told me Dad had it handled. Those were my mistakes." Mom leaned forward. "No, you were learning. Both can be true." That was probably the most adult thing I had ever heard my sister say. Mom looked around the table again. "You all have the luxury of saying this because I was the one trying to keep everyone together." I asked. "Then answer one question." She looked at me with open irritation. "If you can sell this house, pay off the mortgage and HELOC, deal with the business guarantee, move somewhere you can afford on your retirement income, and avoid asking me for $100,000, what exactly are you asking me to save?" Mom did not answer. I waited. No one filled the silence. Finally, she said, "You think selling is some neat little solution because you don't have to live with the humiliation." There it was. Not homelessness. Not hunger. Not medical care. Humiliación. "What humiliation?" Elaine asked. Mom looked at her. "You know exactly what people are like. We've lived here for decades. Everyone knows this house. Everyone knows the store. What do you think happens when we suddenly sell, move into some tiny condo, and Olivia closes Juniper and Lace?" "People will know." Elaine said. "Know what?" Mom's voice rose. "That we lost everything." I shook my head. "That's not the same thing." Mom snapped toward me. "Easy for you to say." "No, it isn't." I looked around the dining room. This house matters to me. I grew up here. I know exactly what gets lost when someone else owns it. But losing an address is not losing everything. Selling a house you can no longer afford to use as a shield for a failing business is not the same as having no home. Mom stared at me. "You would really let us do this?" I had spent weeks hearing that sentence in different forms. I finally answered it without trying to soften anything. "I'm not letting you do anything. You and Dad made the loans. Olivia owns the business. You all have decisions to make. My decision is that my condo proceeds are not financing another delay." Mom's eyes filled. I felt the old instinct immediately. Explain more. Reassure her. Tell her I loved her. Make the boundary hurt less. I did none of those things. Not because I did not love her. Because love was exactly what she had been using to turn my answer into a negotiation. Uncle Mark spoke for the first time in several minutes. "Nancy, if the numbers Charles gave are right, selling now may actually be what preserves something." Mom turned on him. "I didn't invite you here to help them gang up on me." Mark's expression hardened. "You invited me because you wanted my opinion." She had no answer for that. Dinner ended without anyone touching the pie. Elaine hugged Dad before she left. But the hug was brief. She told Mom she would call her the next day. Mark shook Dad's hand and told him to call the realtor before the next bank deadline. Neither of them told me I was selfish. Neither declared Mom a villain. They simply left with the same information the rest of us finally shared. Joshua and I were putting on our coats when I heard Mom behind us telling Olivia she could stay the night. Olivia said no. Mom followed her out. I stayed near the doorway because Joshua was still saying goodbye to Dad. Through the open front door, I heard Mom call from the driveway. "You're really going to walk away after everything I did for you?" Olivia stopped beside her car. For years, that question would have been enough. She would have turned around. She would have apologized. She would have let Mom explain her own feelings back to her. This time, Olivia faced her. "I don't even know what you did for me anymore." Mom stood completely still. Olivia got into her car and drove away. I watched the taillights disappear at the end of the street. That was the first time I saw Mom lose control of the daughter she had spent years keeping dependent. It was not the last. The house was listed less than 2 weeks after that dinner. Dad called the same realtor he had spoken to in January, and this time he did not cancel the follow-up. By then, Olivia had also made her decision about Juniper and Lace. She called the accountant herself, asked for a full meeting, and told Mom and Dad she wanted to begin an orderly wind-down rather than keep buying time with money none of them could afford to lose. Mom argued for another season. She said spring traffic would improve, that new inventory had already been discussed, and that closing right after the wedding would make everything look worse than it really was. Olivia listened, then asked a question I had never heard her ask Mom before. "What number would make you admit it isn't working?" Mom did not have one. Closing a business was not dramatic in the way opening one had been. There was no ribbon cutting, no champagne, no photographs. There were spreadsheets, vendor calls, markdowns, canceled orders, storage decisions, and customers asking whether the closing sale meant the store was moving. Olivia stopped placing new inventory orders. She worked with the accountant on a liquidation schedule and contacted vendors directly instead of letting Mom speak for her. Some accepted partial payments. Others wanted firm dates. Piedmont Community Bank agreed to work with the family as long as they kept to a repayment plan and stopped increasing the balance. None of it happened in a day. It took weeks, and every week forced Olivia to look at numbers Mom had spent years trying to keep soft around the edges. I did not manage the closure for her. That was important. Olivia asked me twice whether I would look at something, and both times I answered the question she actually asked instead of taking the process over. Once she wanted to know whether a liquidation estimate looked mathematically plausible. Another time she wanted a second opinion on a proposed inventory schedule. I gave her my view, then stopped. The rest belonged to her. I had spent too long in a family where helping someone meant quietly assuming responsibility for what happened next. I was not rebuilding that habit under a more respectable name. Mom hated the closure more than I expected. She showed up at the boutique several times and rearranged displays after Olivia had already marked items for clearance. She told customers the store was restructuring until Olivia finally corrected her in front of one of them and said, "No, we're closing." Mom's face went blank. Olivia told me about it later, not with triumph but with embarrassment. She keeps acting like if she uses a different word, it changes what's happening. I understood exactly what she meant. That had been Mom's method for years. Failure became transition. Debt became temporary pressure. Control became support. A lie about roof money became keeping resources in the family. Words had always been one of the ways she made consequences easier to avoid. The house went on the market at the end of April. I did not attend showings or call the realtor for updates. Dad sent me information occasionally because he knew the house still mattered to me, but he stopped presenting every development as something I needed to solve. The listing photos were the part that got to me. The rooms looked too clean, almost anonymous, stripped of the things that made them ours. The dining table was set for people who did not exist. The upstairs hallway looked wider after Mom removed the family photographs. The pantry door with our height marks was not visible in any photo, and I was irrationally grateful for that. Some things did not need to become marketing. There was an offer within a few weeks. It was slightly below asking, then improved after negotiation. The final number landed close enough to the realtor's original estimate that the exit plan still worked. At closing in June, the first mortgage was paid. The HELOC was paid. A portion of the remaining proceeds went toward the personally guaranteed business line and the gap left after inventory liquidation and vendor settlements. My parents did not walk away rich. They also did not walk away ruined. After the debt was handled, they still had enough to move into a smaller condo, keep an emergency reserve, and live within the pension and retirement income they already had. Mom described that outcome to relatives as losing almost everything. Dad described it as getting out before it got worse. For once, his version was closer to reality. A few days before the sale closed, Dad texted and told me the buyers had agreed to let them leave a few boxes in the garage until moving day. He asked whether I wanted to come by and take anything from my old room or the attic. I waited a full day before answering. Part of me did not want to go back. The last time I had walked through the house, Mom had been trying to use it as evidence that I owed her money. I was afraid the rooms would feel contaminated by all of it. They did not. They felt smaller. That surprised me. The kitchen, where every family argument had once seemed enormous, was just a kitchen. The stairs I had run up as a teenager were narrower than I remembered. My old bedroom looked like a room someone else would soon paint. I packed one box of photographs, a ceramic bowl Grandma had made, 2 Christmas ornaments I had loved as a child, and a stack of old-school notebooks I had forgotten existed. I did not take furniture. I did not take anything Mom might later say had been meant for Olivia. I wanted memories, not another inventory of contested objects. I stood in front of the pantry door for a long time. The pencil marks were still there. Taylor, 9. Olivia, 6. Taylor, 12. Olivia, 10. One line where Olivia had obviously cheated upward by standing on her toes. For a second, I had the strange impulse to photograph every mark in case the buyers painted over them. Then I stopped myself. I took one picture. That was enough. Dad came into the kitchen, carrying a small box. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes." He looked at the pantry. "I thought about taking that piece of trim off." I smiled. "So did I. Your mother said that would make the wall look damaged." "That sounds like Mom." Dad gave a tired laugh. Then he held something out. My old house key. I looked at it and realized I still had the matching one on my own key ring. Mom had given it to me when I left for college. She had said, "No matter where you go, this will always be your home." For years, I loved that sentence. Now I understood it differently. A home could be meaningful without being permanent. A person could belong somewhere without having to finance its preservation forever. Memory was not a lien. I took my own key off the ring and held it for a moment before placing it in Dad's palm. "I guess I don't need this anymore." Dad looked at the key. No, there was sadness in his face, but he did not turn it into a request. I appreciated that more than an apology. He closed his hand around it. "I'm sorry," he said. I waited. Not because I wanted him to suffer, because I had learned that apologies in my family often came with an invisible request for immediate relief. Dad continued. "Not just about the roof, about all of it." I thought keeping the peace made me the reasonable one. Mostly it made you easier to sacrifice. That was closer than anything he had said before. I nodded. "I hear you." He looked at me, maybe waiting for, "It's okay." I did not say it. Instead I said, "I need to see what changes." Dad nodded slowly. "That's fair." That was the beginning of something better between us, but not a reset. I stopped measuring his progress by how guilty he sounded and started measuring it by what he did. He sold the second car he no longer needed. He set up automatic budgeting around their actual retirement income. He stopped moving money for Olivia. When Mom tried to start a discussion about borrowing against the new condo before they had even moved in, Dad told her no. He told me about that only much later, after the answer had already stayed no. Olivia's next step surprised me. I expected her to take several months off after the boutique closed. Instead, she applied for merchandising and assistant buyer roles. She had more useful experience than she had realized. Juniper and Lace had failed financially, but she still knew product selection, customer behavior, visual merchandising, vendor communication, seasonal planning, and the ugly side of inventory mistakes. For once, she talked about those mistakes directly in interviews instead of pretending the business had been successful until an unfair bank ruined it. She accepted a merchandising coordinator position with a regional retailer in Charlotte. The salary was lower than what she had once imagined Juniper and Lace would eventually pay her. The title was less glamorous than founder. She also had a manager, a budget she did not control, deadlines someone else set, and approval requirements she could not talk her way around. She loved parts of it. She hated parts of it. That was probably healthy. A month into the job, she called me after work and said, "Do you know what happens when I order too much inventory now?" "What?" "My manager makes me explain it." I laughed. "Terrible. It's humiliating. Are you surviving?" "Barely." Then she laughed too. That was the first conversation we had that felt like sisters again without pretending the previous months had disappeared. Mom did not adjust as well. At first, she sent Olivia money. Not huge amounts. $200. $300. Then $500 with a message that said, "For groceries while you get settled." Olivia returned it. Mom sent it again. Olivia returned it again. Then Mom started dropping things at her apartment. Groceries Olivia had not requested. Household supplies. Gift cards. A new blazer for work because Mom thought the one Olivia wore to an interview didn't look senior enough. Olivia told her to stop. Mom said she was only being a mother. Then she crossed the line that finally broke something. Olivia's manager called her into an office one afternoon and asked if everything was okay at home. Olivia had no idea what she meant. Her manager explained that a woman identifying herself as Olivia's mother had called the corporate office. Mom had said Olivia had recently been through a financial trauma and might need extra patience while adjusting. She also mentioned that Olivia had previously owned her own business and therefore had more leadership experience than her current title reflects. When Olivia told me that, I had to put down the glass I was holding. "She called your employer?" "Yes." "What did you do?" "I apologized to my manager and told her it would not happen again." "And Mom?" Olivia was quiet. "I'm going there tonight." I did not offer to come. She did not ask. That conversation belonged to her. She called me afterward from her car. I could tell she had been crying, but her voice was steady. I told her not to call my employer again. Ever. What did she say? That she was trying to help. Of course. I told her not to send me money either. I waited. And? She said I was being ungrateful. That was also predictable. I told her if she keeps contacting my work, sending money after I say no, or calling people for me, I'm going to stop answering her calls for a while. I leaned against my kitchen counter. That's clear. She said, "You put this in my head." There it was. Even now. Even after the business, the house, the family dinner, the documents. Mom still needed a third person to explain why Olivia might tell her no. "What did you say?" I asked. Olivia took a breath. I told her Taylor didn't do this. You did. I closed my eyes. Not because the sentence made me feel victorious. Because Olivia had finally said something I had spent years wishing she could understand, and she had said it without me standing beside her. Mom's response was exactly what I would have expected. She accused Olivia of rewriting history. She reminded her how much money they had spent saving the boutique. She listed sacrifices. She said children had no idea what parents gave up until they became parents themselves. Olivia did not debate every item. She repeated the boundary once and left. That was when Mom finally lost the version of Olivia she had been trying to preserve. Not at the family dinner. Not when the boutique closed. Not when the house sold. She lost her when Olivia stopped equating being rescued with being loved. For a while, Mom blamed me for everything. She told Aunt Elaine I had turned the family into a spreadsheet. She told Dad I had convinced Olivia that independence meant rejecting help. She told me directly that Joshua had changed me and that marriage had made me selfish. That one almost made me laugh. Joshua had not changed me. He had simply never required me to shrink in order to keep him comfortable. There is a difference. I did not cut Mom off completely. I also did not keep having the same argument. I told her what contact with me would look like. If she wanted to talk about ordinary life, I would answer. If she wanted to discuss Dad's health, family logistics, holidays, or practical matters, I would listen. If she called to pressure me for money, blame me for Olivia's boundaries, recruit relatives against me, or reopen the question of whether I should have saved the house, I would end the conversation. Mom told me those rules were cruel. I said, They're clear. She said families should not need rules. I said ours does. The first few times she tested them, I followed through. She called once to tell me Olivia was struggling because she refuses support. I said I was not discussing Olivia without her. Mom kept going. I said goodbye and hung up. Another time she started telling me Dad regretted selling the house. Dad had told me the opposite 2 days earlier. I stopped her and said if Dad wanted to tell me how he felt, he could call me himself. Mom said I was making communication impossible. I told her I was making triangulation harder. She hated that word. I kept using it only when it fit. Eventually, the calls became shorter. Then, slowly, more normal. Mom never gave me the apology I might have wanted years earlier. She never sat down and said, I favored Olivia, used your reliability, manipulated information, and expected your money because I believed you would always yield. Real people rarely confess with that kind of narrative precision. The closest she came happened in July. We were talking about a cousin's graduation when she suddenly said, I did what I thought a mother was supposed to do. I knew exactly what she meant. I could have argued. I could have told her mothers were supposed to let adult children fail, tell them the truth, respect property, and not build financial plans around money that was not theirs. Instead, I said, I know that's how you saw it. She was quiet. That was all. I did not need agreement from her to understand what happened. By August, my parents were settled in their condo. It was smaller, but not tiny. 2 bedrooms, a little balcony, a kitchen Mom complained did not have enough storage, and an elevator Dad secretly loved because his knees had begun bothering him on stairs. Their neighborhood was close to a grocery store, their doctors, and a walking trail. The first time I visited, Mom spent 20 minutes talking about what she hated. The second time, she showed me a chair she had placed beside the balcony door, because the morning light was good there. People adapt when the option to avoid adapting disappears. That was true of Mom too, whether she admitted it or not. Olivia began sending Mom and Dad a small amount of money each month after she had been at her new job long enough to stabilize. Not because they demanded it. She told them it was her contribution toward the business debts they had taken on for her. Dad tried to tell her it was not necessary, Olivia insisted. Mom tried to return the first payment. Olivia sent it again. When Mom asked me to tell Olivia to stop, I refused. That's between you and her. The sentence annoyed Mom. I liked it, not because it punished her, because it was finally true. My relationship with Olivia rebuilt more slowly. We did not become best friends overnight. There were still moments when old reactions surfaced. She sometimes heard judgment in questions I meant literally. I sometimes expected entitlement before she had shown any. But we had started doing something embarrassingly simple that we should have done years earlier. We asked each other directly. If Mom said Olivia was upset with me, I called Olivia. If Olivia heard I had said something, she asked me. If I thought she was avoiding a problem, I did not ask Mom to explain why. The system depended on us not comparing information. Once we stopped allowing that, it became much harder to maintain. The only thing from that spring I still looked at occasionally was one photograph from San Juan. Joshua had taken it on the second evening of our honeymoon. I was standing near the water with my hair pulled back because of the wind, laughing at something outside the frame. There was nothing dramatic about the picture. No luxury pose, no revenge caption. No evidence that back in North Carolina, my mother was leaving voicemails about banks and houses. One evening in August, Joshua found me looking at it. Do you ever regret that the trip got tangled up with all of this? He asked. I thought about the question. The honeymoon had not been untouched. I had taken calls. I had read bank statements. I had learned my father had lied about roof money while I was sitting thousands of miles away. I had discovered that my mother had planned a 6-figure financial conversation around my wedding. There were definitely more peaceful honeymoons. But I shook my head. No. Why not? I looked at the photograph again. Because it was ours. Joshua smiled slightly. That was exactly it. The Asheville reservation had always been something Mom could control. She paid for it. She held the booking. She could change the guest name. She could take it back and tell herself she was simply reallocating something inside the family. Puerto Rico was different. Mom had not paid for it. Dad had not arranged it. Olivia could not be given it. My parents did not know the hotel. They did not know the confirmation number. They did not know enough to change anything. For the first time, I had built a part of my life that did not require secrecy because I was planning revenge. It required privacy because it belonged to me. That difference became one of the most important things I learned that year. When I was younger, I thought adulthood meant becoming the daughter nobody had to worry about. I took pride in solving my own problems, earning my own money, recovering quickly, and rarely asking for help. Somewhere along the way, my family turned that strength into a standing obligation. If I could handle more, I should. If Olivia could not handle something, I should give something up. If Mom was frightened, I should make the fear disappear. If Dad wanted peace, I should be the person easiest to disappoint. For years, that arrangement looked like love because no one named the cost. Then my parents took away a honeymoon reservation they thought I needed. And for the first time, their plan failed before I even knew there was a plan. They thought I would stay home. They thought I would see the house at risk. They thought my condo would close. They thought I would do what I always did. What changed everything was not that I became cruel. It was that I finally understood the difference between helping people and preventing them from experiencing the consequences of their own decisions. Dad had to face what avoiding conflict had cost. Olivia had to face what being protected had cost. Mom had to face what keeping everyone dependent on her version of love had cost. And I had to accept that sometimes the smartest, kindest decision available is the one that feels least like rescue. The house was gone. The boutique was gone. My relationship with my family was different. But none of us had been destroyed. That was the truth Mom had been most afraid to test. We survived the consequences. And once we did, there was nothing left for me to save. You do not prove love by rescuing people from every consequence of their choices. When family asks for your money, time, or future, you have the right to ask questions, demand honesty, and say no when help becomes enabling. Protecting your boundaries does not make you selfish. It keeps other people from turning your strength into an obligation. Support can mean offering information, guidance, or practical help without sacrificing your stability. Pay attention when guilt replaces transparency. If this story gave you something useful to think about, subscribe to the channel and stay with us for more family stories and lessons.